Chapter 871. But my lord, don't we have Chishi? A voice suddenly rang out in his ear. Like a pebble being thrown into a lake, ripples spread across its surface. Gao Xianji's mind jolted as he came back to his senses. He heard the assistant general say anxiously, his eyes filled with hope. According to the rules of the imperial court, Anshi and Chishi depend on each other, assisting each other in offense and defense. But Anshi is on a higher level than Chishi. If something happens to Anshi, Chishi will be the source of Anshi's reinforcements, ready to send soldiers to Chishi to support us. Right now, even if the imperial court is short on soldiers like in the War of the Southwest, doesn't Chishi still have soldiers? In the Battle of the Triangular Gap, Dusong Mangpoj suffered a major defeat, and Dian Mangpoj died in battle. Later on, I heard that he ambushed a good Elan at the Chishi armory, killing that black wolf Yabgu and his 5,000 elites. Moreover, in the War of the Southwest, he even managed to reverse the tides, defeating the more than 400,000 soldiers of the Mengshi, Yusang army. Can't even he do the same? If we can hold out until he arrives with his soldiers, there might still be hope. The deputy general anxiously said. In the past he would have never said such a thing, but now, this was their last hope. Gao Xianji said nothing, but his eyes were no longer as cold and aloof as they had been at the start. They were like ripples on the surface of a still lake. That brat, Gao Xianji's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. At this moment, he suddenly remembered that several months ago, Wang Chong had sent him a letter advising him not to attack the Shi kingdom. At the time, Gao Xianji had laughed it off, and he had also found the letter to be rather baffling. But at this moment, an irrepressible thought rose up in his mind. When that youngest son of the Wang clan had sent him that letter, had he already predicted today's scene? But as soon as this thought flitted through his mind, Gao Xianji shook his head and sneered. Not even he had expected to be besieged at Talas, the 30,000 soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army, facing complete annihilation. How could a 17-year-old child have predicted this? Qianli, there's no need to say any more. Gao Xianji finally opened his mouth. His eyes showed a kind of indifference and calmness, as if he had disregarded life and death. It's a long journey from Chishi to here. Even if that youngest son of the Wang clan truly possesses remarkable abilities, even if he's willing to help us, it's already too late, because we can't last that long. My lord, the general was visibly moved. Gao Xianji waved his hand to stop him from continuing. Only those who had participated in this battle would understand just what sort of opponent the Anshi Protectorate Army was facing at Talas. As Anshi's protector general, Gao Xianji had never lost a battle. This was not just because of his outstanding strategy and intelligence, but also because of his powerful will. Gao Xianji had never been one to easily admit defeat, but this time, it was no longer a question of admitting defeat. After 2 months of fierce fighting, the Anshi Protectorate Army had truly reached the end of its rope and was on its last legs. The Anshi Protectorate Army was the most elite force of the Tang dynasty. The best soldiers of the armies of the Central Plains had all been sent to Anshi, creating this lion whose name could shake the western frontier. But not even the most formidable lion could deal with an opponent more than 10 times its size. In truth, the fact that the Anshi Protectorate Army had been able to last 2 months under the torrential assault of the Arabs was a testament to its strength. They had not shamed the Tang dynasty. Qianli, I've been wrong all these years. In the western regions, I've always believed that our greatest enemy was Uzan and the many small kingdoms of the western regions. If we allow them to form an alliance, the foundation that the Tang dynasty has built up over the centuries in the western regions will be obliterated. Gao Xianji suddenly said. The wind howled in the sky. He looked ahead, and his tone was unprecedentedly calm. In his life, he had always been trapped by fame and fortune, and he had never seen the situation in the western regions so clearly as he did now. But in truth we were all wrong. In the western regions, our greatest enemy has never been those small kingdoms of the western regions that could possibly ally with us, nor has it been the nearby and harassing Uzan. It has been the Arabs standing before us. They are stronger than the Uzan, more greedy than the kingdoms of the western regions, and even more ambitious and aggressive than the Turks. They are the greatest threat to the Tang dynasty. In this battle we have no path of retreat. The imperial court has no more soldiers to use, so we can only rely on ourselves. Anxi is the Tang dynasty's greatest barrier in the northwest. If Anxi is lost, the entire western regions will fall into the hands of the Arabs, and the several hundred years of the Tang dynasty's work in the western regions will be destroyed. And if the western regions are lost, even Qixi will find it very difficult to resist. And in the end, it will be Longxian, the capital, that will be threatened. Next to him, the general's face trembled, a look of fear appearing in the depths of his eyes. In this battle, he had only been paying attention to the vast sea of Arab soldiers before him. He had never thought about what would happen after this battle. Although he was in a perilous situation, he had only viewed this battle as a war on the border. He had never thought about the effects it would have on Anxi and the Tang dynasty, the capital. He had never imagined that the effects of this battle would be so far-reaching. If the Arabs really were allowed to advance through Anxi, Qixi, and Longxi to reach the capital, they would truly be the sinners of the Tang dynasty. Pass on my order. In 7 days, we will fight to the death with the Arabs. We cannot be the slightest bit careless in this battle. Even if we die, we must demonstrate the dignity of my Tang dynasty. Gao Xinji sternly said. This general understands. The western regions, the Anxi Protectorate headquarters. My lord, we've checked. It's already past noon, but we still haven't received a letter from Lord Protector General. In the massive Protector General Hall, an Anxi Protectorate soldier kneeled on one knee, his head lowered to the ground as he respectfully reported. What? Feng Changqing's entire body trembled as he stood up from his seat, a look of deep unease on his face. It shouldn't have happened, it shouldn't have. My lord, could it be that the intensity of the battle has caused the messengers to be delayed, resulting in the delay? The kneeling Anxi Protectorate soldier cautiously said. No, it can't be like that. Lord Protector General's military orders are as strict as a mountain. He doesn't even make the slightest mistake when he eats. A request for reinforcements is as important as this. There can't be any problems. Feng Changqing was dressed in blue, his face haggard, and if one looked carefully, one would notice that his eyes were bloodshot. When the news that Gao Xinji's army had been trapped at Talas had arrived, Feng Changqing had been working late into the night, unable to eat or sleep. His entire body had become much thinner, and as the situation became more and more dangerous, more and more urgent letters began to pour in. By now, it had been several days since Feng Changqing had slept a wink. In just 2 short months, Feng Changqing had a lot of white hair on his head, and his face was full of wrinkles. If one looked at his appearance alone, it would be hard to believe that this man, who looked like he was in his 40s or 50s, was actually in his early 30s. Although his mind was exhausted, Feng Changqing's eyes showed no sign of sleep. He felt a deep unease. In the last few days, the only consolation in Feng Changqing's heart had been the letters that the Anxi Protectorate army had sent from Talas every day, one after another. As long as these letters arrived every day, Feng Changqing would know that everything was fine in Talas, that the Protector General was still safe. But today, the letters that had been coming every day for more than 2 months had suddenly vanished. This made Feng Changqing feel extremely uneasy. After serving under Gao Xinji for so many years, Feng Changqing knew his commander's personality like the back of his hand. His commander would never easily change his habits. Once he did, it was assuredly because he had made an important decision. My lord, could it be that you've already? Feng Changqing suddenly thought of something, and his heart grieved, tears and snot streaming down his face. Be at ease. No matter what, I won't let you die. Staggering, Feng Changqing suddenly pushed aside the Anxi Protectorate army soldier and charged out of the hall. His hair was in disarray, his hairpin falling to the ground, and he seemed to have gone mad. Qixi. Only Qixi could save my lord and the 30,000 soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate army. Warning. A new change has occurred in the mission A Choice of Destiny. Side mission Fall of a Great General. Every war is accompanied by enormous sacrifices. When an empire is about to decline, its great general will fall first. This is the curtain call of an empire, but also the rise of another. In the Battle of Talas, Anshi Protector General Gao Xianji is on the verge of falling. User has 7 days to save Gao Xianji's fate. If the mission succeeds, user will be rewarded with 6,000 points of destiny energy. If the mission fails, user will be deducted 18,000 points of destiny energy. Warning! In the Battle of Talas, a choice of destiny. User's mission is about to fail. Warning! When Talas is lost, user will be immediately obliterated. In the distant city of Steel in Wuxiang, Wang Chong was still inspecting the sand table in the hall when he suddenly heard a waterfall of voices. With these voices, Wang Chong's eyes suddenly flashed with a bloody light, so intense that it was suffocating. Wang Chong had been holding a small red banner in his hand, and upon hearing these voices, Wang Chong's body froze as if he had been petrified. The fall of a great general is Gao Xianji. Wang Chong grimaced at the sound of this voice. Gao Xianji was the commander-in-chief of the Anshi Protectorate Army. For the Stone of Destiny to suddenly issue this mission meant that the city of Talas was in an extremely perilous situation. Chonger, what's wrong? A familiar voice, vigorous and dignified, came from next to his ear. Wang Chong turned his head and saw that his father Wang Yan, big brother Wang Fu, and second brother Wang Bei were all looking at him in astonishment. It's nothing. Chapter 872. Everything has been discussed. Father, big brother, let's pass down the order and get ready to move out. Wang Yan sternly nodded, not thinking too much about it. Speed is of the essence in war. We can't delay the matter of Talas for too long. Now that everything is ready, we can set off for Talas. Fu, go and make the arrangements. Yes, father. Wang Fu straightened his back and quickly left. Chonger, you will be the leader of this operation. Your big brother, your second brother, and I will do our best to cooperate with you. There's no need to worry. Soldiers are important matters of state, and this operation concerns the lives of the 30,000 soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army and the entire structure of the western regions. We cannot be the slightest bit careless. Before we set off, let's conduct one last simulation. Wang Yan sternly said. Yes, father. Wang Chong nodded. Without standing on ceremony, he took over the reins and began to give a detailed explanation. There was no such thing as father and son on the battlefield. This war concerned the lives of more than 100,000 soldiers, as well as the fortune of the Central Plains for the next 1,000 years. Would it be like in his last life, where expansion was thwarted and the Central Plains plunged into civil strife? Or would it continue the glory of the Tang dynasty and the Han people, and become the strongest existence in the world? Everything would depend on this battle. A few moments later, the final simulation concluded, and Wang Chong finally walked out of the hall. A fierce gust of wind blew past Wang Chong's face, causing his hair to dance in the wind, and his mind to calm down. There are still 7 days before the fall of the great general. In other words, the city of Talas will fall in 7 days. 7 days is more than enough. Wang Chong stood at the door, a harsh light in his eyes as he quickly walked out. Beat the drums. Soon, loud thumps echoed throughout the city of steel. The ground rumbled and trembled as the city of steel was like a massive beast that had suddenly awakened. Countless soldiers were gathered in well-organized ranks, gathering toward the imposing city of steel from all directions. The Qixi Protectorate, the mixed infantry and cavalry, the Annam Protectorate, the Wuxiang cavalry, the ballista squads, the Gonka people, the mercenaries of the western regions, the regular armies of greater and lesser valor. More than 100,000 soldiers had all gathered here, creating a grand spectacle. Next to these troops, countless caravans of iron and steel, caravans of grain, craftsmen, and herdsmen of various tribes were also gathered here. The aura of war clamored in the dust. As Wang Chong ascended the city of steel's tower and appeared in front of everyone, countless gazes instantly turned to him. In the sunlight, Wang Chong's tall figure became the most dazzling existence in the world. There's no need for me to explain why everyone has gathered here today. I want to use this chance to tell those who harbor evil intentions and make enemies of the Tang dynasty that offend my Tang dynasty. No matter how far away, they will be executed." With these impassioned voices clang, the clear cry of a sword resounded through the air. Under thousands of gazes, Wang Chong unsheathed his sword and pointed it west. "Move out!" Roar! A heaven-shaking roar resounded through the world, accompanied by the rumbling of the army. Some foreign and Han soldiers surged out of the city of steel like a surging river, surging along the cement road toward the distant Talas. Rumble! The earth quaked, and the heaven-shaking momentum of this army shook the entire western regions. The largest western expedition in the history of the Tang dynasty had begun. Han, I'll leave the matters of Qixi to you." Wang Chong held his hands behind his back on a massive tower that soared into the clouds as he gazed at the vast army of foreigners and Han stretching out to the horizon. All was quiet, and just when everyone was about to think that Wang Chong was talking to himself, a cold and emotionless voice finally came from behind him. "Mm." And then all was quiet again. Wang Chong inwardly chuckled at this icy voice. As expected, it's still that Su Han's Han. Who could have imagined that Su Han's Han, who had only been at the true martial realm the first time they met, would break into the imperial martial realm the next time they met, accomplishing what others could not even achieve in 5 or 6 years. No one knew what had happened to him in the past year, nor how he had reached this level of cultivation. But to Wang Chong, he might have been surprised if this had happened to anyone else. But Wang Chong was not surprised that it had happened to Su Han's Han. As a genius who was publicly acknowledged to have the makings of a great general, and who had once reached the brigadier general level, Wang Chong was not surprised that Su Han's Han had progressed so quickly. Su Hanshan's strength might not have reached the level in Wang Chong's memories, but there was no doubting his intelligence, strength, and strategic vision. Moreover, after more than half a year of training and biting, Su Hanshan's body had become much thinner, but he was also like an unsheathed sword, sharper and more composed. This was why Wang Chong had summoned him. The Battle of Talas is of great importance. Once I leave, Qixi will be left defenseless, and the Uzan and the Western Turks are certain to move. I only left you 8,000 Hu 1,000 Han, and 8,000 bandits and brigands. This is the greatest help I can give you. No matter what, you must hold them. Qixi is the gate to Longxi. If it falls, the gates to Longxi will be wide open, and all the people will be exposed to the iron hooves of the enemy. The consequences will be unthinkable. And on the front lines we will also be threatened. Wang Chong continued. In order to fend off foreign aggression, one had to first stabilize the interior. If the rear was unstable, Wang Chong found it very difficult to imagine how he could fight in peace on the front lines. Thus, the rear had to be stabilized. Relax. Nothing will go wrong. Su Hanshan finally spoke. As he spoke, he walked up from the back and stood shoulder to shoulder with Wang Chong. He was wearing a suit of black armor, and his head was slightly raised, his eyes like the stars. He was still as cold and proud as Wang Chong remembered him to be, but his aura was much thicker and more dignified, brimming with the air of a general. Su Hanshan's words were very simple, but they were very powerful. However, I still need your help, Su Hanshan added. Oh, 50 ballista teams, Su Hanshan indifferently said. Fine. Wang Chong smiled and agreed without the slightest hesitation. 50 ballista teams, each team of 5, meant that there were only 250 people. To Wang Chong, this didn't have much of an effect. After concluding his conversation with Su Hanshan, Wang Chong quickly left the gate tower. At the lofty gate of Steel Gate, Su Yiqin and Su Qi were waiting. My lord. Upon seeing Wang Chong, Su Qi and the others immediately bowed. It was about time. All that was left was for Wang Chong to set out. Wang Chong nodded, and then he walked past them toward the gate, toward the fairy-like figure of Su Yiqin. Take care. I'll be waiting for your return. Be at ease. I'll definitely return in triumph. Wang Chong grinned, and then he walked over to Su Qi and took the reins of the white-hoofed shadow. Let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, the two of them mounted their war horses and quickly headed out of the city one after the other. Behind them, Su Yiqin stared at Wang Chong's back, the smile on her lips slowly fading, her eyes suffused with deep concern. This was not the first time Su Yiqin had seen Wang Chong leave like this. If she had no understanding of Arabia or Talas, Su Yiqin might have believed this to be a simple campaign. But even an imperial great general like Gao Xianji had been trapped in Talas and had still not broken out. From this, one could easily imagine the strength of the Arabs. But Su Yiqin did not want to burden Wang Chong in any way. So no matter how worried she was, Su Yiqin always maintained a smile in front of Wang Chong. A cool breeze accompanied by a gust of sand blew by. Su Yiqin narrowed her eyes and lightly coughed. "Young lady," a voice came from behind her. Su Yiqin's personal maid, Xiao Zhu, had at some point appeared behind her, worriedly gazing at Su Yiqin's back. "It's fine, don't tell anyone else." With these words, Su Yiqin quickly vanished from the city of steel. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers surged in the direction of Talas, one batch after another. At the very back of the army, Wang Chong called over Su Qi. "We're still moving too slowly. Su Qi, take a group of cavalry and set off first. I have something for you to do." Wang Chong rode on the white-hoofed shadow as he looked into the distance. "Marquis, please give your orders. Take this letter with you. Everything you need to do has been explained in the letter. Do as I say. I'll only give you 2 days. You don't need to worry about us. Once you're done, wait for us at the Anqi Protectorate headquarters." As Wang Chong spoke, he took the letter from his bosom and handed it over. "This general will go." Su Qi took the letter, but without even reading it, he quickly turned around. You, everyone follow me." Speed was of the essence in war. And a few moments later, Su Qi had pulled out 5,000 cavalry from the army of more than 100,000. Stirring up a cloud of dust, he left the army and shot away. "Gao Xianji, hold on. Until we reach the battlefield, this is all I can do to help you. Be careful of the Karluks. The people of the other races are not trustworthy," Wang Chong said to himself as he looked in the northwest in the direction of Talas. The situation at Talas was getting more and more perilous. If everything went as expected, the Karluks would rebel once more. History could change, but people's personalities would never change. In truth, Gao Xianji's tactics had a major weakness. He liked to use the Anqi Protectorate army in the front and the mercenaries in the rear. If he won the war, this was fine. But if the war did not go smoothly, just like at Talas, this was the shackles of death that Gao Xianji had placed on himself. Chapter 873. Flap, flap, flap. As Wang Chong's army of more than 100,000 soldiers rode out of Qixi, countless carrier pigeons and rock eagles took off in every direction. This large-scale mobilization of soldiers had attracted the attention of countless people. On the distant Tibetan plateau, some Tibetan horsemen looked down from their vantage point, saw that dense mass of soldiers, and immediately turned their horses around. "They're finally moving out?" Next to the Uzun royal capital, in an underground prison that no one could see, there was a creaking sound as the steel bars opened. As Huashu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoj watched, a figure slightly combed back his hair, raised his head, and slowly walked out of the prison. Buzz! All was quiet and nothing happened, but in Dusong Mangpoj and Huashu Wuzong's eyes, the entire world seemed to rumble and tremble with that person's footsteps. After a long time, the Uzun, the Tang dynasty, and the western regions were finally about to usher in a new wave of change. As the Qixi army departed, on the border between Qixi and the western Turkic Khaganate, a massive blue wolf stretched its neck and howled, its shrill howl traveling some li. The wolf howl continued to spread from the edge of Qixi, all the way to the depths of the Turkic steppe. Gallop! A few moments later, 20 to 30 li from the Qixi border, 5 Western Turkic soldiers suddenly turned their heads and called out. Then, each of them riding a giant wolf, they hurriedly galloped off into the distance. A few hours later, neigh! The neighing of a warhorse resounded from the main peak of Mount Sanmi, the seat of the Western Turkic Khaganate's court. Following the loud neigh of the horse, a burly figure slowly appeared on top of Mount Sanmi, like a deity. Everyone's eyes were glued to him. At that moment, the sky darkened, and even the sunlight seemed to be obscured by this figure. Urgent! All the Turkic cavalry immediately lowered their heads, expressions of respect and submission on their faces. In the Turkic language, Ergin was an honorific given to a person of extremely high status. Other than the Western Turkic Emperor Ishbara Khagan, there was only one person who could earn the respect of so many Turkic soldiers around the Khagan's court, Great General Wuxia. Just like the Tang dynasty of the Central Plains, although the Turks were brave and skilled in battle, only a handful of them could be called great generals. Wuxia was one of them. The surroundings were so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Wuxia stood at the top of Mount Sanmi, his disdainful eyes shining like the sun in the sky. Wuxia did not say a word. He only sat on the divine sun chariot. His cold gaze was like that of a god. He looked down from above and slowly scanned the land. Waving his right hand behind him, Wuxia leaped into the air, crossing the 20-some zhang to descend the mountain. Rumble. The warhorse landed in a cloud of dust. At the same time, thousands of warhorses neighed and galloped behind Wuxia. Tens of thousands of Turkic cavalry galloped out from behind Mount Sanmi, leaving a trail of dust in their wake as they charged down behind Wuxia. Each of these Turkic cavalry exuded a storm of energy. Not even the 5,000 carefully selected Turkic warriors, led by the Black Wolf Yabgu, could compare to them. Moreover, these cavalry were completely different from the other Turkic cavalry. The steeds they rode were all taller and more muscular, clearly taller than the other Turkic steeds, each of them as handsome as a dragon. Rumble. The warhorses quickly vanished into the west. After the Battle of the Chishi Armory, the entire Turkic steppe was finally thrown into turmoil. Flap flap. One carrier pigeon after another flew out. The Uzun and the Western Turks were far from the only ones to react to Wang Chong's expedition. These two sides were not the only ones paying attention to this war. In the skies of Chishi, countless birds were flying toward the interior of the western regions. Gaochang Lulan, Yu Danhuan Gumo Wisan, all the kingdoms of the western regions, large and small, were paying attention to this war. A fire at the city gate will bring disaster to the fish in the moat. Although this war was a clash between the Tang dynasty and Arabia, two great empires of the East and West, it also concerned all the kingdoms of the western regions. Each country of the western regions needed to make its own choice in this war. The influence of this war was not limited to just the east of the Tsong Mountains. Have you found out everything? Whispers could be heard in the darkness. It was not the language of the Central Plains that they were most familiar with, nor was it Arabic, but a minority of the Hu language that no one understood. We found out everything. Gao Xinji has already given the order. In 7 days, he will open the storehouses and take out all the wine, meat, and rations to reward the army. He's been very secretive about this matter, and hasn't even told us about it. But based on his usual style, he's prepared to cut off all means of retreat and fight to the death with the Arabs. Another voice in Tala's replied in a low voice. Bastard. The first man to speak clenched his fists. In the dim starlight, one could vaguely make out that the speaker had long and narrow eyes, fierce and vicious. Above his lips were 2 thick mustaches, and it was clear at a glance that he was a man brimming with ambition. Most shocking of all was the aura and light of a ruthless and ruthless ruler that his eyes exuded. In all of Talas, besides Gao Xinji and a few elite Han generals, there was only the mercenary leader of the Karluk tribe Wan Hapeluo. In the Karluk language, this name had only one meaning: King of Kings. Wan Hapeluo had always been the strongest and most outstanding leader of the Karluk tribe. In his hands, the Karluks had become the strongest mercenary tribe on the steppe, possessing an extremely high status. In the western regions, they possessed an extremely high status. The Tang army is doomed. Gao Xinji has dominated for so many years, but this time, he's found the wrong opponent. The Anchi Protectorate army is doomed. He's preparing to drag us down with him. But he won't get the chance. Wan Hapelua's fierce voice resounded through the air. Gully, have the Arabs replied? They've replied. The Arabs have promised to take care of our safety. In addition, as long as we act as spies and open the gates, they will give us another 800,000 taels of gold. In addition, all the gold Gao Xinji plundered in the Shur Kingdom belongs to me. The Arabs have also promised that they will support us in ruling over the other tribes in the western regions. The Karluk general called Guli said in a hoarse voice, his voice tinged with a special meaning. Good. Wan Hapeluo coldly smiled, a frightening light in his eyes. Gao Xianji and the Anxi Protectorate Army will fight the Arabs to the death in 7 days. We'll move tomorrow night and lure the Arabs into the city. Gao Xianji might not get the chance. Yes. Your subordinate will immediately give the order for our brothers to prepare. Starting tomorrow, Gao Xianji and the Annam Protectorate will become history. They won't get another chance. The western regions will be the world of Milord and our Karluk. The Karluk general called Guli immediately said. Wan Hapeluo chuckled and gave a satisfied nod. The Anxi Protectorate Army and Gao Xianji were renowned throughout the world as the war god of the western regions. If he could personally bury this lion of the western regions, he would be able to add a dazzling stroke to Wan Hapeluo's and the Karluk army's record books. This would be the best gift for their Karluk tribe to rule over the western regions. Reporting. Just as Wan Hapeluo was feeling the most pleased with himself, the sound of footsteps suddenly rang out in the darkness. Wan Hapeluo and the Karluk general turned their heads and saw a Karluk mercenary rushing toward them. What's going on? What's all the fuss about? Don't you know the rules of the army? Wan Hapeluo frowned. Gao Xianji had been extremely strict in managing his army, even though he had already made up his mind to betray Gao Xianji. Before truly moving, Gao Xianji still had to abide by the iron law of neutrality. Leader, it's bad. We just received a message from the tribe behind us. Our tribe has been surrounded by the Qixi Protectorate, and all the women, children, and the elderly have been captured. Even the tribe's cows, sheep, and warhorses have been brought to the Tsong Mountains. The Karluk mercenary's breathing was ragged, his expression one of extreme panic. What? Wan Hapeluo and the general at his side widened their eyes, their bodies trembling as if they had been struck by lightning. Bastard, how could such a thing happen? Give me the letter. Wan Hapeluo was enraged as he snatched the letter from the tribal soldier's hands. The Karluk tribe had many people, and the majority of the men would usually leave the tribe to fight in the field, leaving the elderly, women, and children to stay in the rear. This was also for the safety of the Karluk tribe. In this way, no matter how many men the Karluks lost in the field, the tribesmen in the rear could still reproduce and receive compensation from their employers. In addition, for the safety of the rear, Wan Hapeluo had left a special eagle in the rear. This was a mutant beast that he had purchased from an Arab merchant at a high price. It could fly extremely fast. If something happened in the rear, this eagle could be used to notify Wan Hapeluo at the front as quickly as possible. In this way, they could take care of each other and avoid being ambushed in the rear. But this sort of thing had never happened before, given the prestige and illustrious fighting power of the Karluks. Yet Wan Hapeluo had never imagined that while he was with Gao Xianji and the Anxi Protectorate Army, his home would be attacked, and it would be the army of the Tang dynasty. When he opened the letter, he saw that it was written entirely in Karluk, and it was marked with a symbol that only his tribe knew. Bastard! A thunderous roar resounded through the skies, shattering the tranquility of Talis. Wan Hapeluo threw the letter to the ground, his entire body seething with rage. Get ready. I'm going to see Gao Xianji. Chapter 874. Rumble. On the road to Anxi, the earth quaked and the heavens swayed. 18 or 19 people stood on each carriage, pulled by 4 horses as they galloped along the cement road. Unlike ordinary carriages, each of these carriages had a white folding sail attached to them. The sail was around 6 feet tall and 8 feet wide. When the wind was in their favor, the sail would be unfurled to increase the speed of the transport. And when the wind was against the wind, the soldiers on the carriages would fold the sail as quickly as possible. Zhang Shouji had built these according to Wang Chang's instructions, using the principles of sails in the hopes that they could transport the Qixi Protectorate to Talis as quickly as possible. As he entered the western regions, Wang Chang's brow began to slowly crease. This war had an even stronger effect on the western regions than he had imagined. When Wang Chang had first met Hulayeg, He had been to the western regions. At the time, the western regions had been extremely prosperous. The 9 families of Zhaowu, the 36 kingdoms of the western regions, and the merchants of Arabia and Spazinu had all gathered here. Pearls, agate, and spices could be found everywhere. It was precisely because the merchants of these countries had gathered here that the western regions could prosper and prosper. But when Wang Chong entered the western regions, all the markets were desolate, with not a single person to be seen. The cities he passed through were practically deserted, and the air was thick with tension. It seems like the war between the Tang dynasty and Arabia has had an even greater effect on the western regions than I imagined. All the Hu merchants sensed the danger and retreated ahead of time. As Wang Chong rode on the white-hoofed shadow, he looked around at the tall and short buildings around him. The streets of this massive city were empty, and Wang Chong could see only a few people. Moreover, they were all nervously watching from a distance, not daring to approach. The scout only glanced in the direction of these people, and a moment later, bang bang bang. All the doors and windows were tightly shut. "Zhang Ke, what's the situation?" Wang Chong asked. Replying to Marquis, "All of the birds have already spread out in a 50-kilometer radius, and there is nothing out of the ordinary. In addition, General Suki sent a letter saying that the mission has been completed. They are about 100 miles ahead of us. General Suki asked if they need to wait for us and meet up with us." Zhang Ke rode his horse and quickly followed from behind. "There's no need. Tell them to hurry up. None of the Karluks are to be left behind," Wang Chong said. When he said the last sentence, Wang Chong's voice suddenly became incomparably cold. "The Hu fear might but not virtue." The Karluks were the key to this battle, but Go Xianji had been too conceited. So conceited that he thought these mercenaries would never betray him. Higher. These people work for money, but Gao Xinji specially arranged for them to be at the back of the army. This was simply digging their own graves. But now that he had switched to Wang Chong, everything was different. The merciful cannot command an army. War was a matter of great importance to the imperial court and the common people. Any kind of mercy was a woman's benevolence, not something a commander could accept. If the Karluks betrayed the Tang dynasty, they had to be prepared to pay the most grievous price. In addition, pass on my order. Have the horses for the transport carriages be swapped with the horses for the cavalry. Increase the speed of the march, Wang Chong said. Yes, Marquis. Zhang Ke bowed from his horse and quickly left to carry out the order. Once Zhang Ke was gone, Wang Chong's eyes flashed as he turned to the vast army in front of him. Unlike the haste of the First War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had made the most preparations this time. More than 100,000 soldiers were working together, and all the supplies were in place. Wagon after wagon flowed along the newly constructed cement road between Anxi and Qixi, but the speed of the march was still too slow. The infantry, craftsmen, axemen, and spearmen could not compare to the speed of cavalry. Moreover, Wang Chong's army also had a considerable number of ballistae. Ballistae were also known as bed ballistae, and each one was extremely large. Moreover, because they were forged from the finest steel, they were also extremely heavy. Each transport carriage could only carry 2 or 3 ballistae. This fact alone made it impossible for Wang Chong's army to move quickly. But Wang Chong was already doing his utmost to increase the speed of the march. Whether it was by adding small sails to the transport carriages, or by swapping out the horses for the carriages with the cavalry's horses, so that the horses could rest and conserve as much energy as possible. All of this was to increase the speed of the march, so that they could reach the city of Talas earlier. Days passed, and the closer they got to the northwest, the thicker the atmosphere of war became, the more desolate and somber the cities became. Around 3 days later, a sandstorm howled up ahead. Beneath the dark clouds hanging low in the sky, a vast and majestic city, clearly built in the style of a strategic military fortress, gradually came into view. This city was completely different from other cities. On the city walls, there was a beacon tower every 10 feet or so, as well as an observation tower. This was something that only the military would use. This is the 4 garrisons of Anxi, Wang Chong quietly said to himself. In the western regions, The most famous garrisons of the Tang dynasty were the four garrisons of Anxi: Suaya, Kucha, Khotan and Shul. This was also where the Tang dynasty's Anxi protectorate was located. If one wanted to travel from Qixi to Talas, Anxi was a place that one had to pass through. In his last life, although Wang Chong had heard of the four garrisons of Anxi, he had never had the chance to go there, much less meet them. Hiya! Wang Chong suddenly urged his horse forward, galloping from the rear of the group. Behind him, Su Qi and the others exchanged glances and hurriedly followed. The buildings of Anxi were not as refined as those of the Central Plains, and they had a crude air to them. As Wang Chong led his men forward, he finally got a clear view of the four garrisons of Anxi. This massive city was crudely constructed, built from massive blocks of stone, and then covered in thick layers of mud. Only then did this ancient and massive city come into being. After standing in Anxi for so many years, the surface of the city was covered in the scars of war and swords. Many places were charred, and there were even a few places where one could see the remains of catapults. The frequent wars had also dyed the city in a layer of black and red. Suaya! Wang Chong raised his head and immediately saw the three modeled characters on the gate. Wang Chong's heart trembled at the sight of these three characters. I didn't think that it would be this city. Of the four garrisons of Anxi, the one that Wang Chong was most familiar with was this legendary city of Suaya. The reason was very simple. In another space-time, this was the birthplace of an immortal poet, and it was also the birthplace of many famed frontier generals. The farthest frontier fortress of the Tang dynasty was precisely this city of Suaya. The army advanced slowly and majestically all the way into Suaya city. With the departure of Gao Xianji and the 30,000-some soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate Army, this heavily guarded fortress had become a defenseless fortress. The gates of Suaya were wide open, and there was no one standing guard. Marquis, there's a stone steal here. When they were still several dozen zhang from the gate, Zhang Ke suddenly pointed to the side of the road. Wang Chong suddenly stopped. This was a huge stone tablet. After being exposed to wind, sun, rain, as well as a long period of time, it had become very mottled. If one didn't look carefully, one would think that it was a brown rock about 2 men tall lying on the side of the road. But with just a glance, Wang Chong couldn't help but widen his eyes. Patrolling on behalf of the heavens, Wang Chong recognized it at a glance. In his last life, before the emergence of his clan, Wang Chong had never left the capital, much less the western regions. Even in his wanderings, he had never been to the western regions. In the western regions, the four great garrisons of Anxi had a thunderous reputation, but there was something even more famous: the skill of patrolling on behalf of the heavens. When Wang Chong was still learning to read, he had heard of this stone stele. In truth, there were probably very few people in the capital who didn't know of this stele. This was because it had been set up by a very special person, Ban Chao, the first true Anxi protector general in the history of the Central Plains. Although it had been Zhang Qian who had opened up the western regions for the first time in the history of the Central Plains and expanded the power of the Central Plains into the western regions. But it was Ban Chao who truly ruled and wielded influence here several hundred years later. The successive dynasties of the Central Plains had constantly gained and lost in the western regions, even losing contact with each other for several hundred years. Countless western regions protector generals had emerged in the intervening years. But when one truly traced back to the past, the first protector general of the western regions was Ban Chao, a scholar of the Great Han Dynasty, more than 1,000 years ago. Although the western regions is far, it is still a land of the kings of the Central Plains. The Son of Heaven finds it difficult to attend to. As a subject of the Son of Heaven, I will patrol on behalf of the Son of Heaven, forever guard the gates of the country. Back when Ban Chao was stationed in the western regions, he had spoken such words that even the deaf could hear, inspiring countless generations of people with lofty ideals to advance and expand into the western regions, resulting in the Great Tang's current situation in the western regions. The place where Ban Chao had set up this stele was said to be the place where Zhang Qian had left the fortress for the first time, the furthest place Zhang Qian had ever reached. This stele had always been heavily guarded by the successive protectorates. But later on, after the defeat of the Tang dynasty in the Battle of Talas, and the annihilation of Gao Xinji's 30,000 elite soldiers, the Arabs had come east. They had passed through the Tsong Mountains and advanced into the 4 garrisons of Anxi. And the first thing they had destroyed was this stele. The stele of patrolling on behalf of the heavens had been dragged back to Arabia and thrown into the sea. When the news had first arrived, countless people of the Central Plains had felt a heartache. Wang Chong had also been wringing his hands, viewing it as the greatest regret of his life. Not even Wang Chong had expected that he would be able to fulfill his long-cherished wish of seeing this stele of patrolling on behalf of the heavens. As these thoughts flitted through his mind, Wang Chong suddenly dismounted from the white-hoofed shadow, as everyone looked on in shock. Relax. This time, the Arabs won't have a single chance to step into the gates of the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong's heart was heavy as he respectfully bowed and said to himself, "Don't worry. This stele had been entrusted to the hot-bloodedness and dreams of countless loyal subjects of the Central Plains. This was their dream, and it was the dream of the entire Central Plains. Wang Chong would never allow this dream to be sullied. Let's go." Wang Chong took in a deep breath and quickly mounted his horse. Calling out to his men, he rode toward Sueya. Chapter 875. Withered leaves drifted through the air over Sueya. Compared to the other cities, this city was more like the interior of the Central Plains. The ground was paved with gray stone and had a damp feel to it. And on both sides of the road, there were more buildings of the Central Plains. Most importantly, there were finally more people here than in other places. It was no longer like other places, which were completely empty, with only a few merchants in sight. However, the atmosphere of war here was also much stronger than anywhere else. Clang-clang. Suddenly, the clanging of metal came from the distance, accompanied by the sounds of fighting. "Zhang Ke, what's going on? Why are there sounds of fighting up ahead?" Wang Chong frowned and gestured for Zhang Ke to come over. The Anxi Protectorate army was already on the front lines, fiercely battling with the Arabs. There shouldn't be any fighting in the city at a time like this. Reporting to Marquis, it's a group of bandits in Sueya. We don't know when they appeared, but when we discovered them, they were setting the city on fire and pillaging. Our troops are currently fighting with them, and should be able to defeat them very quickly. Bandits? Isn't this the territory of the Anxi Protectorate? Isn't Feng Changqing still in the residence? Why would bandits appear here? Wang Chong sternly said, his brow creased. Although Gao Xinji had taken with him nearly 90% of the Anxi Protectorate army, he had still left 10% behind to guard the rear. With these great Tang soldiers guarding the rear, this sort of situation shouldn't have occurred. Moreover, one of the twin walls of the empire, Feng Changqing, was holding down the rear. "I'm not sure." Zhang Ke shook his head, a look of confusion in his eyes. "Based on what our Eagle team has seen from the sky, there's probably more than one group of bandits in Sueya. And this situation has probably been going on for some time. General Kang Xian is currently leading his men to drive out the bandits. I'm confident that it won't be long before all of them are eliminated." Wang Chong nodded. "We'll know once we ask Feng Changqing." Just as he was speaking, the sound of galloping hooves could be heard. A messenger passed through the heavy ranks and suddenly rushed over from the front. "Report. Marquis, Anxi Vice Protector General Feng Changqing requests an audience." "Oh." Wang Chong's eyes flashed in surprise. "Speak of the devil, and the devil appears." Without much time to think, Wang Chong patted his warhorse and immediately moved forward. On the side of the official road, beside a green government office, a few figures stood quietly. The leader was an ugly, dark-skinned, middle-aged man, with a straight back and a gentle demeanor. He looked extremely confident. Behind him were 4 burly soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate army, long sabers strapped to their waists. It was unknown how long the 4 of them had been standing there, but their expressions were slightly anxious. "He's here." At the sight of Wang Chong's horse, Feng Changqing's eyes brightened, his heart overjoyed. As if he had found his savior, he led the 4 elites of the Anxi Protectorate army forward to meet the enemy. For nearly 2 months, Feng Changqing had been anxiously waiting, every day like an ant on a hot pan. Only he knew how he had managed to endure these 2 months. Now that Wang Chong had finally led an army of more than 100,000 soldiers through Suiya, Feng Changqing felt much more at ease. In truth, as Wang Chong's constant evasions, he had once suspected that Wang Chong was just making up excuses. But at this moment, when he saw the surging Qixi protectorate, Feng Changqing no longer had any doubts. And what excited Feng Changqing the most was that he had originally believed that Wang Chong would only bring 20 to 30,000 soldiers at most. He had never imagined that Wang Chong would bring reinforcements that far surpassed his expectations. Marquis, you finally arrived. Feng Changqing strode forward, bowing in front of Wang Chong's white-hoofed shadow and clasping his hands in greeting. The moment these words left his mouth, Feng Changqing could no longer hold back his tears. The city of Talas was in a perilous situation, and he had not received a single letter in more than 3 days. Although he was extremely anxious, he could not show it, because everyone was watching him. If even he panicked, then all of Anqi would be finished. But after waiting for so long, this day had finally arrived, Wang Chong's arrival. "My lord, there is no need for such courtesy." Wang Chong's expression turned serious, and he hurriedly dismounted and helped Feng Changqing up. Feng Changqing was a famed general of Anqi, one of the twin walls of the empire. In terms of age and seniority, he had far surpassed Wang Chong, but in terms of status, Wang Chong had far surpassed Feng Changqing. Gao Xianji had left Feng Changqing to guard the rear, giving him the position of vice protector general. But Wang Chong was Qixi's protector general, and the young marquis that had been personally conferred by the Holy Emperor. In this aspect, Feng Changqing could not compare. Thus, when Feng Changqing met Wang Chong, he needed to bow as a subordinate. "Dare I ask, my lord, what is the current situation in the western regions? What is Lord Gao Xianji's situation? And when I just entered the city, I saw bandits running amok. Aren't there still soldiers of the Anqi Protectorate Army stationed in Suiya? Why is something like this still happening?" Wang Chong got straight to the point. Wang Chong had long since heard of Feng Changqing's reputation. In his last life, the twin walls of the empire had been 2 of the brightest stars of the western regions. Although he had heard a lot about them, this was his first time meeting them in person. Feng Changqing had an extremely ugly appearance, and his status was not as high as Wang Chong's. But Wang Chong did not look down on him in the slightest. On the contrary, he treated him with extreme respect. This was also why he had hurriedly dismounted and bowed upon seeing Feng Changqing. This was a loyal subject of the empire, one of the best in logistics and administration. Even Su Yiqin, who would later become the queen of logistics, had once said that she admired him immensely. It was precisely for this reason that bandits were running amok in Suiya, that Wang Chong found it even more difficult to understand. Marquis might not know, but Anqi is currently plagued by internal and external threats. The Arabs have not only colluded with the Shur kingdom, but have also sent out many spies to bribe the Hu of Anqi, equipping them with horses and weapons, so that they can stir up trouble in the rear and disrupt Anqi. In addition, the Anqi Protectorate Army led by Lord Gao Xianji has been locked in a stalemate with the Arabs at Talas for 2 months. The people of the western regions are unsettled, and many small kingdoms and tribes of the western regions are taking advantage of the situation. Anqi is severely lacking in soldiers. The total number of soldiers doesn't even add up to 2,000, far from enough. What Marquis is seeing right now is the result of my doing all I can to maintain it. Otherwise, Suiya would have been even more chaotic. Feng Changqing had a haggard expression on his face. As one of the twin walls of the Tang dynasty, besides Gao Xianji, Feng Changqing was the most dazzling figure in all of Anqi. Feng Changqing truly could not escape the blame for Anqi's current state, but only Feng Changqing understood just how difficult his situation was. When the 36 kingdoms and tribes of the western regions were taking advantage of the chaos to rise up, the 2,000 soldiers of the Anqi Protectorate Army that had been left behind to guard the area was truly a single log. On the one hand, Feng Changqing was worried about the safety of Gao Xianji and the 30,000 soldiers of the Anqi Protectorate Army at Talas, And on the other hand, he had to do his utmost to maintain the stability of the western regions. So that's how it is. Wang Chong was also moved. He knew that Gao Xianji hadn't left many soldiers in the western regions, but Wang Chong had never imagined that there would only be 2,000 soldiers. Maintaining the safety of the vast western regions, with such a small number of soldiers, was practically impossible. In truth, the fact that Suiya, as the city closest to Talas, was still able to have so many merchants and still maintain order on the surface, was a testament to Feng Chongqing's astonishing abilities. Chen Bin, give Lord Feng Chongqing 2,000 soldiers, and equip them with crossbows and shields. In addition, I will give you 10 ballista teams. No matter what, Suiya must be stabilized. Wang Chong ordered without turning his head. Suiya was where the Anqi Protectorate was located. It was both the closest defensive fortress to Talas and the spiritual center of the western regions. If even the Anqi Protectorate's Suiya fell into chaos, the entire western regions would truly be thrown into chaos. Thus, no matter what, Wang Chong had to stabilize the situation in Suiya and kill all the robbers. Yes, Marquis. Chen Bin's voice came from the rear, and then the sound of hooves galloping into the distance. Marquis, I can deal with the situation in Anqi for now, at least for the time being, but Lord Gao Xianji is in a dire situation. I'm afraid that he won't be able to hold on for much longer. I hope that Marquis can hurry up and reinforce Lord Protector General as soon as possible. Feng Chongqing suddenly said, his eyes brimming with unease and anxiety. Lord Feng, don't be in such a rush. Just what is the situation at Talas? Wang Chong asked. Up until now, almost all the information on Talas had come from the Anqi Protectorate and Feng Chongqing. No one knew the situation at Talas better than Feng Chongqing. Not even Zhang Quebec. The situation at Talas is extremely bad. When the Arabs first arrived, they didn't have many soldiers or sufficient preparations, and there were no trees around Talas that could be cut down. But now, the Arabs are gathering more and more soldiers, and their attacks are getting fiercer and fiercer. Based on the information I've gathered, the Arabs are already cutting down trees in the rear and bringing them to the front lines, where they are building ladders and other construction equipment. This is clearly the intention of an all-out assault. In a few days at most, Talas won't be able to hold out. The Arabs are currently focusing all their attention on Talas. If Talas falls, Anqi will quickly fall. The entire western regions will fall into the hands of the Arabs. Feng Chongqing's expression was extremely agitated. Marquis, Anqi and the Tang dynasty have no more soldiers to use. We can only rely on my lord. Chongqing requests Marquis. No matter what, you must rescue Lord Protector General and the Anqi disciples in the city. Please. Chapter 876. Around Wang Chong, Li Sai, Su Shixian, Cheng Sanyuan, Zhang Ke, Sun Jiming, Chen Burang, and Zhuang Buping couldn't help but be moved by this sight. Feng Chongqing's name was like a thunderclap to their ears. For many of them, he was a lofty and unreachable figure that they would never be able to come into contact with in their entire lives. But now, in front of so many people, Feng Chongqing had put down his dignity and come to beg Wang Chong, who was far younger than him, in an extremely humble manner. This was a massive blow to all of them, but Feng Chongqing seemed to not notice, and he continued to bow. The situation in the western regions was getting tenser and tenser, and after almost 2 months of darkness and despair, Wang Chong was the only hope he could see, the only chance of survival for the 30,000 soldiers of the Anqi Protectorate army trapped at Talas. Lord Feng, be at ease. Although the Arabs are powerful, they are far from being invincible. To borrow the words of Han Great General Chen Tang, those who openly offend my mighty Han will be executed no matter how far away they are. The Tang dynasty is not weak, and the last thing the Arabian Empire should have done was collude with the Shur Kingdom and covet Anqi. In this battle, I will not only rescue Lord Gao Xianji and the soldiers of the Anqi Protectorate army, I will also make the Arabs pay the heaviest price for their recklessness. This is also the true reason I have come here. Wang Chong's eyes were bright as he slowly raised Feng Chongqing up, his expression abnormally solemn. Each of Wang Chang's words was like a heavy weight, causing Feng Changqing and the surrounding Anqi Protectorate army soldiers to tremble in shock. Feng Changqing had been bursting with anxiety and unease, and when he saw Wang Chong, his eyes turned red and tears almost came out. But at this moment he inexplicably felt at ease. Slowly, Feng Changqing raised his head. For the first time, he was carefully examining the young Protector General before him. This was a youth of 16 or 17, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. It was easy to associate him with the scions of the great clans of the capital, but he exuded a steadiness that no scion of his age could possess. His expression was wise and his manner was calm, causing others to unconsciously pay attention to every word he said and deeply believe him. Not only that, but Feng Changqing could also sense an extremely strong military aura from him. He was no ordinary general, but a top-notch general who had been through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. He had a wealth of battle experience and was extremely qualified. In his 10-some years in the Anqi Protectorate army, he had only sensed this sort of aura on one person, Shi Protector General Gao Xianji. But not even Gao Xianji exuded such a thick aura of iron and blood. Feng Changqing had once looked down on Wang Chong, but he had also re-examined him. But in the end, Feng Changqing had realized that he had underestimated him. This youth was far stronger than he had imagined. Marquis speaks the truth. This one has made a slip of the tongue. With Marquis leading the mighty army of my Tang dynasty, Changqing is confident that the Arabs will never be able to get what they want. Changqing wishes Milord an early report of victory and a triumphant return. When the time comes, Changqing will definitely hold a banquet for Milord in the Protectorate headquarters to welcome you and celebrate your achievements. Feng Changqing's expression also turned serious, and he turned to the side of the road and once more gave a deep bow. It was the same bow, but the meaning behind it was completely different. I wish Milord an early report of victory and a triumphant return. Behind Feng Changqing, the 4 soldiers of the Anqi Protectorate army also bowed deeply. Wait for my news. Wang Chong only smiled. This time, he did not help Feng Changqing up. Mounting the white-hoofed shadow, he set off once more. His back was straight, and there was no reluctance in his eyes. Pass on my order. All soldiers move out. Speed up. Rumble. The army of more than 100,000 surged through the last stronghold of the Tang dynasty and toward Talas, which was nearly 1,000 li away. Behind him, only when the last soldier of the Qixi Protectorate had left Suya did Feng Changqing slowly raise his head. Under the setting sun, the more than 100,000 Qixi reinforcements were like a black flood, sweeping through the distance with unstoppable momentum. This sort of momentum, unstoppable and unstoppable, had been deeply imprinted into the minds of every Qixi soldier. But in Feng Changqing's mind, all he could think of was the confident figure of that youth. It's true that 100 rumors are not as good as a meeting, and a meeting is far better than a reputation. In the past, it was me and Milord who underestimated Marquis. For the Tang dynasty to have Marquis is the fortune of Anqi, and the fortune of all the people of the world. I am confident that Marquis will definitely succeed in this battle. After leaving Suya City, Zhao Fu found himself surrounded by mountains and valleys. There were no cities or villages, and the surroundings were completely desolate. All soldiers, hear my order. Advance at full speed. Keep up. Don't fall behind. Hurry. Talas is in dire straits. Don't let the Arabs have their way. They passed through the precipitous Song Mountains, which looked like a giant coiled dragon, and followed the desolate mountain path west. The sounds of urging came one after another, and the entire army moved at an extremely high speed. Speed was of the essence in war, and birds were constantly flying back and forth above the army. Although they still hadn't reached Talas, they could already hear shouts in the distance. Although they couldn't see anything, everyone could imagine that hundreds of thousands of soldiers had gathered at Talas and were engaged in a fierce battle. Everyone's expression immediately tensed up. In the army, from top to bottom, all the generals' expressions were incomparably solemn, as orders were passed down one after another. Even the Hu mercenaries, who spoke a different language from the Han, could feel the tense atmosphere. They all held their breaths, not daring to breathe too loudly. Not only that, a day later a new order was issued. All the hooves of the horses were to be wrapped in cloth, and the mouths of the horses and livestock were to be covered with nets to prevent them from neighing or making any noise. The noise of the army of 100,000 was immediately reduced to a whisper, but in this silent environment, the atmosphere of war had only intensified. Although the higher-ups had not explicitly said it, even the slowest person could tell that an unprecedentedly fierce battle was imminent. 100 li. As they got closer and closer to Talas, the shouts grew louder and louder. 80 li. Talas was still nowhere to be seen, but the waves of noise completely drowned out the rumbling of the carriages and the marching of the army. 50 li. The army moved faster and faster, and on the horizon, one could faintly make out a mountain range. The mountains were lush, and although there were no abnormally tall trees due to the terrain, they were still covered in green vegetation. The Whitestone Ridge was the closest obstacle to Talas. Looking up from the Whitestone Ridge, one could already see a huge, majestic city protruding from the top of the mountain. Thick smoke billowed above the city, and flames soared into the sky, enveloping the entire sky. The atmosphere was getting tenser and tenser. The army of 100,000 had solemn expressions, none of them making a sound. Even the cattle, sheep, and other livestock that served as food for the army seemed to sense something, their mouths closed, their eyes brimming with unease. Hurry up! Order after order was issued, the supervisors and officers of the army of 100,000 frantically issuing orders. All of them could sense the atmosphere of war, their hands tightly gripping their weapons as they stared forward. All of them understood that the battlefield was over there, that the enemy was there. What awaited them next would surely be an unprecedented, most ruthless, and most intense battle. The gates of the Tang dynasty were right behind them, and the 30,000 soldiers of the Anqi Protectorate Army were waiting for reinforcements. There was no path of retreat. 40 li. The tension in the air was so thick that it was suffocating. At the front of the army, Zhang Ke and the other members of the Eagle team had gathered together, all of them solemn. Ever since they had entered the western regions and formed this team, Zhang Ke and the others had experienced many aerial battles, including the battle at the Triangular Gap, the battle at the Qixi Armory, and the battle on the Turkic Steppe. Each time, they had returned victorious. But all of them understood that their opponents this time were completely different. They were far stronger than any of their previous opponents. Cavalry, infantry, and even the eagles in the sky. In their last few encounters, they had not managed to gain the slightest advantage. Get ready. Zhang Ke turned to look at the others, his gaze sweeping past each member of the Eagle team. I don't need to say more about how powerful the Arabs are. We only have one chance, and no matter what, we must win. Not a single one of them can escape. Understood. Everyone spoke successively. All of them were like bowstrings that have been pulled taut, and their expressions were extremely serious. Zhang Ke nodded and quickly turned to look at the western sky. His gaze swept over the sky again and again, as if he was searching for something. After some time, screech. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the western skies. A moment later, massive Arabian hunting falcons, their eyes sharp and piercing, unfurled their massive wings and flew toward them. They're here. Move. Zhang Ke's pupils constricted, and the entire Eagle team tensed up. These were the hunting falcons that the Arabs had stationed on the perimeter. Although the Arabs were attacking Talas with all their might, they had never expected reinforcements to arrive. But like all imperial armies, the Arabs maintained a vigilant watch over their surroundings, even in the midst of fierce battle. Thaish! Without the slightest hesitation, the scarred Eagle King Xiao leaped from Zhang Ke's shoulder and shot into the air like an arrow. The battle could begin at any moment. Go! Chapter 877. Only the Arabs themselves knew just how great of a price they had paid in order to get a better understanding of the Arabs. 11 members of the Eagle team had died to the east of Talas. 20 to 30 eagles had died in battle, and even Xiao had been heavily injured. But Zhang Ke had also succeeded in grasping some of the Arab patterns. The Arabs had a unique style of combat. The eagles in the air would often be very far away from the scouts on the ground, and the hunting falcons could scout for several dozen li whenever these Arabian hunting falcons encountered an enemy bird. One of them would immediately return to inform the scouts in the rear. In order to avoid being discovered by the Arabs, the scouts could only return to the ground. At this time, if they couldn't see any enemy in the air, the Arabian hunting falcons would continue forward, circling in the air to gather more information on the enemy before leaving. If they wanted to avoid being discovered by the Arabs and make preparations, they had to exterminate all of these enormous Arabian hunting falcons that were skilled in aerial combat. If they let even one escape, all their efforts would have been for naught. More than 100,000 Chishi reinforcements had traveled a great distance, and concealing their auras would be meaningless. One circle, only one circle. No matter what, we have to succeed. Zhang Ke looked nervously at the sky. The Arab army was currently spread out in all directions, and the west was only a part of it. This was the best chance for them. The entire Eagle team had been mobilized. This battle would determine the success or failure of the entire army, including the armies of Chishi and Anshi. As these thoughts flew through Zhang Ke's mind, the dense ranks of the Tang dynasty eagles clashed with the Arabian hunting falcons. Cree! Screech! A shrill cry resounded through the sky. Without any contact or probing, the eagles of both sides plunged into the fray and began a bitter slaughter. Feathers danced in the air and blood splattered everywhere. It wasn't just scattered blood, but blood that filled the sky from the very beginning. Bang! In a flash, an Arabian hunting falcon plummeted from the sky like a boulder, smashing into the hard ground of sand and smashing into a bloody mess of flesh and bones. Behind it, 2 or 3 great Tang eagles crashed into the ground like raindrops. 5, 6, 7, 8. The battle was far more intense than they had imagined. The Arabian hunting falcons were far more vicious than they had imagined. Their beaks were like steel chisels, their claws like iron hooks, and every time they swooped down, they would tear away chunks of flesh and feathers. Each of the Arabian hunting falcons could fend off 2, 3, or even 4. Zhang Ke's eagle king Xiaosha had been injured by these ferocious attacks. But this time, Zhang Ke and the eagle team had adopted a completely different tactic. Whoosh! Like a pack of wolves, 30 to 40 eagles lunged at an Arabian hunting falcon, pecking and clawing. In a single exchange, the enormous and vicious Arabian hunting falcon was surrounded and killed, its corpse plummeting from the sky. During this process, the entire eagle team was completely focused, completely ignoring the attacks of the other hunting falcons. No matter how they attacked, none of the eagles looked back, and none of them tried to escape. They endured the pain of surrounding a hunting falcon, and then immediately moved on to the next. In these circumstances, the eagle team suffered particularly heavy losses. The eagles were covered in wounds so deep that their bones were visible, and they continued to drop to the ground like rain. Seeing this scene, the eyes of all the members of the eagle team turned red. They had spent a great deal of time training each eagle, and this was not just some simple training. It had also been built up with deep emotions. Each time an eagle fell, it felt like their hearts were being torn apart, but they could only bury this feeling deep in their hearts. 1, 2, 3. Zhang Ke's tactic was proving effective. In just a few seconds, a large number of Arabian hunting falcons were dropping from the sky. Not even the fiercest hunting falcon could stop the attacks of so many eagles. But Zhang Ke's heart was still tense. We can't let them escape. We can't let them escape. Zhang Ke clenched his fists as he stared at the sky. No matter how many Arabian hunting falcons they killed, it was meaningless. The most important thing was to exterminate all the Arabian hunting falcons. If even one managed to escape, the operation would be a complete failure. In the sky, the number of Arabian hunting falcons continued to dwindle. In the face of the suicidal attacks of the eagles, the hunting falcons were finally afraid, some of them even screaming as they tried to turn and flee. Everyone's hearts leapt into their throats at this sight, and Zhang Ke's face paled. At this moment, a rock eagle lunged forward like a bolt of lightning, tearing apart the back of an Arabian hunting falcon with a single swipe of its claw, and tossing it out of the sky. A second, a third, and a final Arabian hunting falcon tried to turn and attack, but it was swiftly killed by the other eagles. Bang! When the last Arabian hunting falcon crashed to the ground, the entire eagle team let out a cheer for the day. Little Shah! Little Shah! Little Shah! The rock eagle that had killed the last 3 Arabian hunting falcons was Zhang Kei's eagle king, Little Shah. Success! Zhang Kei mentally breathed a sigh of relief. The Arabs wouldn't be completely unaware, but killing these Arabian hunting falcons would at least buy Marquis and his army some time to speed up the operation. The rest is up to Huang Batian and the others. If they wanted to get close to the Arabs without being discovered, there were at least 2 obstacles. The first was the hunting falcons that the Arabs had scattered around the perimeter of the army, and then there were the scouts on the ground. Each hunting falcon corresponded to a scout on the ground. Although they had won this aerial battle, they could not let their guard down. The scouts on the ground would come to investigate if they noticed that the hunting falcons had disappeared. But this was not within the scope of Zhang Kei's abilities. Ready! A loud shout came from up ahead. Zhang Kei turned his head and saw that Huang Batian was riding a large reddish-brown horse, calling out to the elite scouts in preparation to move out. As they got closer and closer to Talas, the army began to move faster and faster. All of them knew that they didn't have much time left, and all of them were on edge. 30 li later, all the Arab scouts on the perimeter had been eliminated, giving Wang Chong and his more than 100,000 soldiers some time to march. 20 li, 15 li, 13 li. The army could be discovered at any moment. Everyone was racing against time. Everyone understood that for every meter the army advanced, their chances of victory would increase by 1 point. All of them were silent, their expressions solemn. The only sounds were the uniform footsteps and the rumbling of wheels. Only the last step is left. In the rear of the army, Wang Chong rode his white-hoofed shadow, surrounded by many experts and generals. His sharp eyes were constantly peering into the distance. Whether it was Zhang Kei's eagle team or Huang Boshan's scout team, everything was under his control. It was impossible for an army of 100,000 to remain undiscovered by the Arabs, but they could push the army to the closest point and gain the greatest advantage. Wang Chong had once used a model to study the terrain around Talas. Although the city of Talas was surrounded by a vast expanse of plains, to the northeast was a series of low hills. If they could reach those hills before the Arabs discovered them, they would be able to catch them off guard. A small ship could easily turn around, and a group of tinsome soldiers could easily change their strategy. But when hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers were attacking the city of Talas, changing the direction of their assault was not so easy. This was also the opportunity for Wang Chong and his Chishi reinforcements. Rumble! At this moment, the earth quaked and the sky swayed as the thundering of hooves came from the opposite side of the army. At the same time, the galloping of hooves could be heard. Reporting, an Arab army of 7,000 to 8,000 has suddenly appeared in front of us and is heading toward us. Lord Protector General, how should we deal with them? The scout dismounted and kneeled on the ground, his expression extremely nervous. Wang Chong faintly smiled as he looked to the front. Behind the rolling hills, a cloud of dust soared into the sky, and within this cloud of dust, 7,000 to 8,000 Arabs formed into a black flood of steel that had suddenly appeared on the summit. In the end, we still found them. Wang Chong grinned unconcerned. In the end, the Arabs were no weaklings. Although he had done his utmost to conceal himself, and had used the sounds of battle to drown out the noise, the Arabs had still sensed something strange, and sent an army to sweep the area. But just 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers is far from enough. The strategy from before was effective. Wang Chong had covered the horses and livestock with nets and cloth, causing the entire army to fall silent and mute. Only the sound of carriages could not be masked, but the road that Wang Chong was traveling along was the busy Silk Road, with all sorts of merchants coming and going. This sort of noise was far too normal, and the fact that his scouts had not reported back made it very difficult to arouse suspicion. Wang Chong had thought this through meticulously, and the final result was already before his eyes. Although the Arabs had heard the noise, they had clearly believed that not many people had come, so they had only sent 7 to 8,000 cavalry to investigate. Clang! With a clear cry, Wang Chong unsheathed his sword, a 4-foot-long Wuxia steel sword that seemed to block out even the sunlight, its sharp edge gleaming with the cold light. All soldiers, hear my order. Advance at full speed. As he spoke, Wang Chong raised his sword and pointed it toward the distant hills. Chapter 878. Rumble. The Arab cavalry in the distance began to grow restless as the army charged. Bastard! How could there be so many Tang people? Why haven't we received any news? On a distant hill, a furious roar in Arabic resounded through the air, as a heavily armored Arab general glared at the vast army before him, his face contorting in shock. Translated by Hypersheep 325. The order he had received was that an army of around 20 to 30,000 soldiers was heading toward Talis. Although he could not be sure if it was the Tang dynasty's army, his superiors had still dispatched a force of 7 to 8,000 cavalry to investigate. The Arabian Empire was a country of war, and all its subjects, from top to bottom, were seasoned warriors. A force of 7 to 8,000 cavalry equipped with the strongest Arabian steeds on the continent was enough to deal with 60 to 70,000 soldiers, but the enemy army was far larger than that. The Arabs had never shied away from battle, but the army they were facing was no ordinary army. The stern and imposing aura, and the sharp aura it exuded indicated that this was an army that had been through many battles, the elite of the elite. Only a madman would use 7,000 soldiers to deal with an army of more than 100,000. Retreat! Retreat! Quickly! Someone! Report to Lord Governor! Screams resounded through the heavens as the 7,000 Arab cavalry fell into panic and began to retreat. In front of them, the more than 100,000 Chishi reinforcements were surging toward them with thunderous speed. In a place 7 or 8 li from Talis, the low hills faintly swayed in the cold wind, causing the weeds at the top of the hills to sway. Although the nearby Talis had long ago become a sea of blood and mountains of corpses, this place was completely silent, as if time had stopped. Kail! Kail! At this moment, a shrill cry pierced through the sky and broke the silence of the entire area. Run! The Tang army is here! Amidst these shouts, the Arab cavalry began to pour down the hills, their faces filled with fear as they madly fled toward Talis. This sudden change quickly attracted the attention of the distant battlefield. The Arab army on the easternmost side of the battlefield was the first to notice. What happened? Isn't this Abdullah's army? Didn't they just set off? Why did you come back? Bastard! Why are they in such a mess? What scared them so much? Some of the Arab soldiers immediately began to curse at the panicked cavalry. Arabia was a country of war and revered courage. Those who refused to retreat and persisted in fighting on the front lines would always be the people most revered by the army. Those who panicked and ran away in fear would forever be the target of disdain. Quick, inform the governor. The Tang army is here. The reinforcements of the Tang dynasty are here. The Arab horseman at the very front ignored the curses of his men and used all the strength in his body to madly shout at the Arab horseman from afar. Absurd. However, his hoarse warning was met with a stern rebuke. The army parted, and a fierce-looking Arab general, clad in heavy armor and riding a divine steed, rode out from the ranks. His right hand held the scimitar at his waist, and he seemed to seethe with killing intent. The most elite army of the Tang dynasty is here. What other formidable army does Anqi have? Even if the Tang dynasty really did send reinforcements, what's there to be afraid of? We've gathered more than 300,000 soldiers. Lord Governor has already given the order that anyone who dares to retreat on the battlefield will be immediately executed. Are these scoundrels seeking death? As the strongest existence on the continent, Arabia had already subdued several dozen countries of various sizes on its borders. And in this battle, the Arabian Empire had gathered more than 300,000 elite soldiers near Talis. What could possibly threaten them at this time? What could possibly make them panic? But a moment later, the Arab general found himself unable to continue. The hills behind the fleeing Arab cavalry began to rumble and tremble, as if they were being shaken by a pair of invisible hands. The trembling was not very loud at first, but as time went on, the trembling grew more and more intense. Even the earth and the battlefield of Talas began to shake. What's going on here? The Arab general slightly grimaced. This was definitely not the work of those 7,000 or 8,000 soldiers. With just 7,000 or 8,000 people, it was impossible to create such a huge commotion. This disturbance was the work of an army of at least 100,000 soldiers. Buzz! A moment later, Ney's horse neighed, and as the Arab general and countless Arab soldiers watched, a black dragon-patterned war banner slowly rose from the hills. Accompanying this war banner was an abnormally large and majestic horseman. 1 horse, 2 horses, 3 horses. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of cavalrymen had appeared at the top of the hills. They covered almost every corner of the crowd's field of vision, and their numbers were increasing at an extremely fast rate. These horsemen did not pursue the Arab horsemen in front of them, nor did they speak. All of them were coldly gazing in the direction of Talas. These horsemen were facing off against the countless Arabs, and in the blink of an eye, an indescribable and suffocating pressure had enveloped the battlefield. For a moment, the entire battlefield was eerily still, even the sounds of fighting becoming much quieter. The Tang people. The easternmost Arab general gulped, and subconsciously took a step back, a hint of fear in his eyes. He was definitely not a weak-willed person, but the pressure this army gave him was too great. Tens of thousands of soldiers didn't say a word, and just stood there silently. Their disdainful gazes and disdainful auras were like mountains pressing down on everyone's hearts, making it hard for them to breathe. Impossible! How could the Tang dynasty still have such a powerful army? The Arab general's eyes were as wide as saucers, not daring to believe his own eyes. Wang! It was also at this moment that a strange feeling welled up in their hearts. At the very center of the hills, the army parted like a tide, and a massive silver-white dragon-patterned banner suddenly rose up from behind the hills, appearing before everyone's eyes. Beneath the banner, the Arab general finally saw the commander of the Tang dynasty. This was a thin youth riding a divine steed with hooves as white as snow. His eyes were filled with disdain, and his entire body exuded a radiant light. On his left and right side, a powerful general accompanied him like a myriad of stars surrounding the moon. "We've finally arrived." Wang Chong stopped at the top of the hill and looked into the distance. After more than 5 days of trudging, they had finally arrived at the city of Talas. From the top of the hill, one could see the smoke of beacons and blazing fires. Arab soldiers and banners were everywhere. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen such a large Arab army. Unlike the Mengshi Zhao people, the Arabs had much larger bodies, and unlike the Izan people, the Arabs were more aggressive. When tens of thousands of Arabs gathered together in the form of an army, they exuded an aura that no other faction or army around the Tang dynasty could compare to. Flames. Black flames that could incinerate all things and invade all. This was what Wang Chong felt when he stood on the summit and saw the Arab army. These tens of thousands of Arab soldiers were like a vast ocean, encircling the city of Talas. This famed fortress of the Silk Road had long ago lost its former grandeur, and all its walls were in tatters. Fresh blood flowed down from the city walls, dyeing the outer walls of this military town a dark red color. The sky was aflame, roiling flames covering the walls. From the summit, Wang Chong could smell the thick stench of blood wafting from the distance. In the rear of the Arab army, catapults were still hurling massive boulders into the walls of Talas. Accompanying these catapults were countless Arab soldiers with scimitars in their mouths, rapidly climbing up the scaling ladders on the outer wall. The battle for the city of Talas had reached its most critical juncture. After 2 months of fighting, the Anxi Protectorate army in the city had reached its limit. Wang Chong could see a steady stream of Arab soldiers climbing up the walls. Outside the massive gate, a massive battering ram more than 100 zhang long, and so large that it would take several men to encircle, it was madly battering at the gate. The thick steel gate was already severely deformed, and would not be able to last for much longer. Feng Chongqing was right. The Arabs really have launched an all-out attack. Wang Chong only slightly creased his brow as he looked into the distance, and then he paid it no more mind. No matter what the Arabs were planning, the moment he had appeared here, everything had been decided. He wanted this city of Talas to become the place where the Arabs suffered their most grievous setback. With this thought in mind, Wang Chong's gaze quickly followed the scaling ladders to the top of the walls of Talas. At the most illustrious place on the walls of Talas, Wang Chong finally saw that imposing figure, whose name resounded through the entire western regions. Standing on the high walls, this figure was constantly cutting down the Arab soldiers climbing up the scaling ladders, roaring as he commanded the other soldiers. His armor was stained red, and there was not a single spot on it that was clean. Gao Xianji's figure was deeply rooted in the wall, seemingly one with the earth. From a distance he appeared like a giant. No matter how many Arab soldiers charged at him, no matter how powerful their charge, they would always be stopped in front of him, forever unable to break through. Around him, Wang Chong could also see the countless figures of the Anqi Protectorate army engaged in fierce battle. After several months of fighting, all of them had reached the limits of their physical strength. They were so exhausted that they seemed ready to collapse at any moment. But a pride ingrained in their bones continued to support them as they tirelessly fought on the walls. No one knew how long they could last, but each of them was using their own methods to persevere. Chapter 880. Impossible. How could there be such powerful cavalry from the east? In the rear of the formation, Umar's pupils constricted, and he almost stopped breathing. The tens of thousands of Arab cavalry he had dispatched were the elite force under his command. They had followed him through many campaigns, suppressing many rebellions and conquering ancient civilizations like the Sassanid dynasty. However, Umar had never thought that such a skilled cavalry would be defeated by the cavalry from the east. They were not a match for them at all. Everyone follow me. At almost the same time, Sun Jiming roared from the rear of the Wuxian cavalry. Taking advantage of the moment when the Arab cavalry had been scattered, he ordered the nearly 10,000 Qishi cavalry to plunge into the gaps in the Arab cavalry like a massive saber. Under the charge of Sun Jiming's cavalry, the scattered Arab cavalry became even more disorderly. On the other side, Chen Burang, Zhuang Buping, Qi Weisi, and the other future generals of Deflecting Blade Manor were also leading the cavalry of the Annam Protectorate and the other mercenaries in the charge. After more than a year of bitter training, these people had not yet reached the level of strength equivalent to Li Sai or Su Han's Han, but the insight, knowledge, and skill in the art of war that they had gained from their time with Wang Chong had slowly matured, and they were beginning to show the embryonic forms of these future generals. From this aspect, the insight, knowledge, and skill they had displayed on the battlefield were far more effective than their individual strengths. This was also why Wang Chong had called them out of Deflecting Blade Manor. Bang bang bang. The army continued to charge, choosing to strike at the weakest points of the Arab army, the most lethal points. The art of war is the art of chess. After training in Deflecting Blade Manor for so long, Sun Jiming, Chen Burang, and the others had all gained a systematic understanding of the art of war under Wang Chong's tutelage. They had also developed an extremely keen sense for opportunities and opportunities. One war Saint Wang Chong was hard enough to deal with, and with these future generals, an army of 100,000 could display an unimaginable power. This was the most valiant and most extravagant army of the Tang dynasty. Boom boom boom. Screams and collisions filled the air as the tens of thousands of scattered Arab cavalry were torn to pieces. Even though the Arabs were tall and innately skilled in battle, war had never been fought by individuals but by groups. Once the Arabs were cut up into small groups, no matter how strong they were, it was meaningless. Bang bang bang. One Arab horseman after another was pierced through from multiple directions, falling from their horses and dying on the ground. In just a few seconds, the Arabs had lost 17,000 to 18,000 soldiers, a speed that left everyone alarmed. When these tactical generals of Deflecting Blade Manor were paired with a future invincible great general like Li Sai, the power of this arrow formation was unimaginable. Nay, the neighing of horses resounded through the battlefield, While Sun Jiming's cavalry were repeatedly cutting through the Arab cavalry, Li Sai had already pierced through the Arab cavalry formation. The massive Fergana horse carried Li Sai like a bolt of white silk as it crashed into the Arab shieldmen at the very back. Careful! Raise the shields! Stop those Tang people! Kill them! Kill them! Those who retreat will die. A series of urgent voices resounded throughout the battlefield, revealing a strong sense of panic. Bum bum bum. On the eastern edge of Talas, countless Arab shield-bearers gathered all their strength to hold up their massive shields. But the only response they received was the clattering of metal clang. Li Sai swung his massive Wuxia steel sword, cleaving the massive Arab shield in front of him, and the shieldmen behind it in two. Seeing this scene, everyone's eyes were filled with fear. The Arabian Empire was a country of war, and all its armor and weapons were forged to the highest standards. The heavy shields distributed to the infantry were all forged from the finest quality of black iron. This material could not only block the full-strength charge of cavalry, but it was also extremely tough. Even the sharpest Arabian saber would find it difficult to scratch it. It was a well-known name in the western regions. No one had expected that this giant Tang general would be able to cleave it in two like it was made of paper, with a single blow of his sword. No matter what price we have to pay, stop him. Axemen, shieldmen, archers, hurry! Don't let him get close. The entire Arab infantry formation was thrown into chaos. Li Sai's godlike stance and divine power had left all of them stunned. Countless soldiers raised their shields and swarmed over from all directions, wanting to block Li Sai and the opening. However, it was too late. Charge! The tens of thousands of Wuxian cavalry followed closely behind Li Sai, their Wuxia steel swords slashing down on these famed Arab shields. Li Sai had only opened a small opening, but the moment the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry charged in, this small opening immediately became a massive gap, throwing the entire army into chaos. Cavalry reigned supreme in the world, and were the most powerful of all soldiers. No infantry without a shield to slow them down could possibly stop cavalry at their top speed. No matter how formidable the Arab infantry was, or how skilled the Arabs were in battle, it was all the same. Bum bum bum. The charge of the 5,000 fully armored Wuxian cavalry threw the Arab infantry formation into disarray. The Wuxian cavalry were the strongest cavalry in the history of the Tang dynasty, the #1 cavalry in the world. On this foreign battlefield, they had finally displayed their unparalleled strength. Even the warlike Arabs were incapable of stopping the charge of the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry. 10 charges, 10 victories. Li Sai's voice thundered through the sky. Boom! The 5,000 Wuxian cavalry scattered like flowers scattered by a celestial maiden. The collapse, which had been limited to the area around the gap, instantly expanded by 10 times, and it was still spreading. No! Deep within the army, the Arabian spear Umar trembled in shock at this sight, his entire face paling. As a famed general of Arabia, Umar had subdued countless opponents, but none of them had given him such an intense pressure and threat as the Tang dynasty cavalry before him. For the first time, Umar felt the aura of death. Although there were still more than 40,000 soldiers around him, they gave him no sense of security. The Mamelukes? Only the Mamelukes can deal with them. A thought flashed through Umar's mind, and at this moment, he thought of the most powerful and terrifying Mamelukes of the empire. Only the Mamelukes were capable of crushing the Arab cavalry into such a state. All soldiers, hear my order. Focus your attacks on the Tang people. Although he was intensely shocked, Umar still did not give up, much less admit defeat. As the illustrious Arabian spear, Umar had always been known for his toughness and tenacity. No matter how powerful his opponent was, Umar would never retreat. He would only have one choice: thoroughly defeat them. 23rd Shieldman Unit, 24th, 25th and 27th Shieldman Units, charge forward and stop their battle. 7th Infantry Unit, 9th Infantry Unit, 10th Infantry Unit, all lines advance. Everyone, no matter the cost, we must stop those Tang people. Umar straightened his back, his gaze sharp, and a series of orders came out of his mouth. The entire army swiftly began to move in accordance with his orders. In all of the Arabian East, Only Umar could think clearly and methodically in the face of the charge of the Wuxian cavalry. As one of the top-class Arab generals, Umar was well aware that while there were fierce soldiers, there were no invincible soldiers. Not even the strongest Mamelukes of the Abbasid Caliphate were omnipotent. The most frightening aspect of cavalry was their speed. If he could slow down the speed of a cavalry charge, then no matter what kind of cavalry they were, they would be no different from ordinary infantry. If he couldn't slow them down, then he would use human lives to make up for it. This was the simplest strategy Umar had in mind. Roar! For General Umar! For the Empire! Countless savage faces appeared around him. The ferocity of the Wuxian cavalry had not only failed to force the Arabian army to retreat, but only stimulated their fighting spirit and killing intent. Countless Arabs surged forward. The Arabs' belligerence and savagery were on full display at this moment. The Tibetans were warlike as well, but they paled in comparison to the Arabs. They were on completely different levels. The Uzan had a limit to their belligerence, and their belligerence was buried in their blood, but the Arabs had no limit. Their belligerence was buried deep in their bones. The two were on completely different levels. Chapter 881. The 7th Infantry Platoon, the 9th Infantry Platoon, the 10th Infantry Platoon. These were the most elite infantrymen trained by Umar. They were also Umar's personal guards. On the battlefield, they also had another function, which was to undertake the task of attacking the enemy. The Arabs dominated the world through cavalry, but they had also researched ways to restrain cavalry. Because the Arabs were far from the only ones who had cavalry and trained them. The 7th, 9th and 10th infantry platoons were the elites that Umar had picked out. On the battlefield, they had killed countless elite forces of enemy nations, including cavalry and infantry. The army was being mobilized, and the soldiers were being rapidly rotated. An invisible net of death was closing in on the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry from all sides. But this was not the end of it. As a famous general, Umar's forte was not as simple as defense. The 30th Cavalry Formation, the 33rd Cavalry Formation, the 40th Cavalry Formation, the 50th Cavalry Formation, the 80th Cavalry Formation. Attack with all your might. Crush their left and right wings. Crush them completely. Umar's eyes were cold and merciless as he quickly locked onto the left and right flanks of the Chishi reinforcements. Avoiding the enemy's strength and striking the weak was not a principle that only the Tang people of the Central Plains understood. The Arabs might not have been skilled in the art of war, but Umar had long ago understood this simple principle that he had fumbled through countless bloody battles. This cavalry of the Tang people was indeed very powerful, but not all of the Tang people's armies were like that. As long as they avoided the Tang dynasty cavalry and defeated the main force in the rear, no matter how powerful the Tang people were, the final victor would still be the Arabs. Not only that, even though the Tang people on the other side were overwhelming, and there were many of them, Umar only needed to buy time in terms of strategy. More than 300,000 Tang elites had gathered on the battlefield of Talas. No matter how many soldiers the Tang dynasty had, in the end, once the 300,000 soldiers had gained enough time to turn around, the 100,000 some Tang dynasty soldiers would still be dead. Boom! The earth rumbled and shuddered. Umar had barely spoken when the 15,000 Arab cavalry in the rear of the Arab camp split into two groups, one on the left and one on the right, charging out from behind the shield wall like two black storms. Black halos vibrated beneath their feet as the 15,000 Arab cavalry moved with godlike speed. In just a few moments, they had reached their maximum speed. 3,000 zhang passed in a flash. This time, the 15,000 cavalry perfectly circled around the Wuxian cavalry, Sun Jiming and Chen Burang, charging straight for the Chishi army in the rear. Infantry. In front of the charging cavalry, they were just lambs waiting to be slaughtered. In the history of cavalry versus infantry, infantrymen were rarely able to win. A fully armored cavalry could crush an infantry force 5, 6, or even more than 10 times its size. The Arabs were the fiercest of cavalry, and they had destroyed countless infantry opponents. Kill them. Destroy their formation, and tear them to shreds. For Arabia, kill these infidels. Hooves thundered as the 15,000 Arab cavalry galloped toward the rear of the great Tang army, their black halos rumbling like thunder. 150 zhang, 150 zhang, 150 zhang. They were getting closer and closer, and they could even see the soldiers on the transport carriages hurriedly coming to a stop and taking up formation. But it was too late. This sort of reaction was useless against the lightning-fast Arab cavalry, who had experienced countless battles. Kill them all! Savage bellows resounded through the heavens as the 15,000 Arab cavalry began their final charge. Ready! Ready! At almost the same time, a loud shout resounded over the earth as silver-white carriages were pushed out from the Tang camp, each carriage flanked by at least 5 Tang infantry. And in front of these infantry, Chen Bin had unsheathed his Wuxia steel sword and raised it high, pointing it forward. His eyes were cold and his body straight, his hand gripping his sword as if it had been frozen in place. 40 zhang, 30 zhang, fire! At the last moment, Chen Bin swung down his sword. With Chen Bin's order, the hundreds of small carriages in the army began to move. Boom, boom, boom. In that instant, the heavens and the earth fell silent. Everyone could hear thunderous booms in their ears. Those were the notes of death. In the next moment, under the gazes of countless people, crossbow bolts more than 3 meters long and covered in inscriptions suddenly shot out from the small cars like a waterfall. Careful, it's ballista bolts. At the sight of these ballista bolts, the eyes of the Arab horsemen at the very front widened, and they almost stopped breathing. An intense fear engulfed them, and they began to pull on their reins to stop, but it was too late. Boom! A thick ballista bolt pierced through the first Arab warhorse, and then the second, the third. These famed Arab warhorses were all covered in thick armor that ordinary arrows could not pierce through, but in the face of the most formidable ballista bolts of the Tang dynasty, they were as useless as paper. Boom! 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 Hundreds of ballista bolts shot through the air, each one piercing through 4 or 5 Arab horsemen. Some of the more powerful bolts even pierced through 7 or 8 horsemen in a straight line. Neighing filled the air as the Arabs lost at least 5 or 6,000 men in a single clash. Despite being hit by the bolts, the inertia of the Arab horsemen allowed them to continue forward, gliding over the ground for a long distance, even reaching the ballista at the very front. But by then they were already dead. Release! Chen Bin's eyes were fixed on the Arab horseman, and he swung down his Wuxia steel sword once more. Boom boom boom. A second volley of ballista bolts exploded into a cloud of dust. Release! A third volley of ballista bolts followed, each one like the scythe of the Grim Reaper, each aimed at an Arab horseman. After 3 volleys of ballista bolts, the fates of the 15,000 Arab horsemen were sealed. The vast battlefield was littered with the corpses of war horses and Arab cavalry. After the 3 volleys of ballista bolts, the rumbling of hooves and the thunderous roars of fighting had vanished without a trace. Blood flowed everywhere on the ground, and the gurgling sound could be heard clearly. Silence. For a moment, the entire battlefield was eerily still, as if even the sounds of fighting had been silenced. In the distance, the Arab soldiers stared at the corpses strewn across the ground, their eyes wide with fear. These 15,000 valiant and famed Arab cavalry had defeated countless opponents many times their size and subdued many powerful foes. At their maximum speed, each one of them could deal with 4 or 5 infantry at the very least. Before setting off, all of them believed that they could kill several times their number of Tang people and completely break through their formation. But none of them had expected that after 3 volleys of ballista bolts, they would completely vanish. Never in the history of the Arabs had they encountered such a thing. At that moment, all of them felt a suffocating pressure. Even Umar's face had turned pale. Advance! Chen Bin's eyes were unperturbed by the sight of 15,000 Arab cavalry falling to his ballistae. With a wave of his sword, 3,000 silver carts pushed 3,000 ballistae over the corpses of the Arab cavalry and began to advance. On their left and right, the other Chishi reinforcements were also stepping over the corpses of the Arab cavalry and surging forward. Kill! Ready! At the same time, Umar unsheathed his sword. Even though he had lost 2 groups of cavalry and nearly 30,000 soldiers, Umar had not given up. He was still trying to buy time for the more than 300,000 Arab soldiers. Battle was not just about tactics, but also strategy. No matter how powerful the Tang people's army was, as long as the 300,000 Arab soldiers could turn around, the only thing awaiting the Tang people would be death. Rumble. The army was getting faster and faster, the distance between the two sides shrinking. This time, without the Arab cavalry, there were no more obstacles between the Chishi reinforcements and the vast Arab army. Finally, boom! There was a heaven-shaking boom as the earth quaked. If one looked down from the sky, they would see the two armies colliding like a tide. At that moment, the entire battlefield of Talis shuddered, and even the earth seemed to be on the verge of being torn apart. Fist against fist, flesh against flesh, warhorse against warhorse, saber against sword, all of them fiercely clashed on the battlefield. There were no tricks in this battle. Everyone was putting all their strength into it. This was the largest and most intense battle between the East and the West. Hold! For the Empire! Stop these infidels! At the very front of the eastern battlefield, the Arab shieldmen were putting their lives on the line to stop the Tang army. Their teeth were clenched, their powerful shoulders pushing up against the 7-foot-tall shields. Bang bang bang! A storm of attacks came from the other side. The 7-foot-tall giants fiercely trembled, but they were able to firmly block the attacks. They were already very experienced in dealing with this sort of attack. A single giant shield could block the attacks of 4 or 5 opponents of the same level, and it was an important tool for the Arabs to use against the cavalry and infantry of other factions. In actual combat, even the cavalry of the Arabs would find it very difficult to break through this barrier. Hold! General has already given the order. As long as we can hold on for a little longer, once the army has finished adjusting, we can completely annihilate them. The Arab shieldmen roared, their bodies leaning forward, their feet digging deep into the earth as if they were one with it. But at this moment, boom! The earth quaked as invisible ripples of wind swept out from the rear of the Tang people's army, instantly engulfing the entire Arab army. Before the Arab soldiers on the eastern side of the battlefield could react, clang clang clang, the halos beneath their feet began to shudder, and their energy began to drop 3 levels, as if shackles had been placed on them. One giant axe after another slammed into Li Sai's body with thunderous force. The 7th, 9th and 10th infantry units under Umar's command had made Li Sai their primary target, but all their attacks were fiercely repelled by Li Sai. Swish! Li Sai swung his sword, causing the golden helmets around him to fly into the air. Those great Tang elites who had lost their heads only trembled a few times before collapsing to the ground. Everyone follow me! Kill them all! Li Sai's furious roar thundered in the ears of all the Wuxian cavalry. Bang bang bang! In just a few charges, the 7th, 9th, and 10th infantry units had been obliterated like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. The formidable strength of the Wuxian cavalry, coupled with Wang Chang's bane of the battlefield halo, caused all the Arab infantry to fall into disarray. Tens of thousands of Arabs fell to the hooves of the Wuxian cavalry. In the face of the overwhelming strength of the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry and their furious charge, their tenacity and viciousness instantly crumbled. Run! Wave after wave of Arab soldiers charged forward, only to be pulverized by the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry. In the face of the power of the Wuxian cavalry, the Arabs finally began to tremble in fear and turned to flee. The ballista army, the Wuxian cavalry, the bane of the battlefield halo, and the more than 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty. The Arab army collapsed like a landslide. In a few short moments, tens of thousands of Arab infantry had fallen in fear on the eastern battlefield. Even more Arab soldiers began to flee as if they were running from the plague. This was the first time in the history of the Arabs that they had encountered such an unstoppable force. In the face of this overwhelming power, all the Arab soldiers felt a fear that came from the depths of their souls. The entire army fell into panic, and the collapse and chaos began to spread from the Eastern Army under Umar's control to the more than 300,000 Arab soldiers behind him. "Bastard! Stop! Anyone who dares to run will be dealt with according to military law. You cowards are a disgrace to the empire." Umar's face was pale, his entire body trembling in anger. His original intention had been to stabilize the army and stop the sudden appearance of this Tang army. In Umar's plan, he only needed to wait a little longer for the entire army to press forward and wipe out this army of the Tang dynasty. But now, before the rear of the army had finished reorganizing, the Eastern Army had been attacked by the Tang dynasty army and was now charging at his own army. This was the exact opposite of what Umar had intended. Bang! Seeing that his army was out of control, Umar finally clenched his teeth and galloped forward. With a wave of his scimitar, 10 Arab soldiers were cleaved in half by Umar's scimitar. Bang! Bang! Umar turned around and galloped again, and another 10 Arab soldiers were mowed down like weeds. After several charges, Umar was surrounded by mountains of corpses and seas of blood. More than 100 Arab soldiers had fallen, but this Arab arrowhead didn't even bat an eyelid, his expression cold and callous. Under this cruel and iron-blooded method, the collapse of the surrounding army finally showed signs of stopping. However, before Umar could gather his entire army, he suddenly heard a loud neigh. At the same time, Umar sensed a powerful aura that resembled a storm rushing towards him at an alarming speed. The Tang people. Umar's heart chilled as the image of a giant riding a Fergana horse appeared in his mind, one that was even taller than the tallest Arab. It was the cavalry leader of the Tang dynasty. Buzz! Umar's pupils constricted, and he turned his head to see Li Sai leaping into the air with his horse, charging towards him like a shocking rainbow. His powerful hands held a huge sword that was even taller than a person, and he swung it down viciously. "Foreign thief, hand over your life!" Li Sai's eyes widened in anger. He condensed his violent gang energy to the extreme and slashed with his sword with the force of a thunderbolt. Boom! In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, there was a flash of light, and in the next moment, a deep, dark, and incomparably powerful force erupted from Umar's body. This stellar energy was suffused with a thick scent of iron and fire, and it fiercely blocked Li Sai's all-out attack. "Ignorant infidel, I will personally end your life." Umar's eyes exploded with a frightening cold light. As one of the best generals under Governor Abu Muslim's command, Umar himself possessed an extremely formidable fighting force. His strength was just as famous as his callousness and ruthlessness. Although his army had been routed, Umar had never been afraid of a battle between generals. In these fierce battles, he had slain countless enemy generals. Umar was known as the Arab Archangel precisely because he had used the blood of these generals to forge his name. But at this moment, the air shuddered as a sonorous voice came from overhead. "You bearded bastard, what are you blabbering about? Listen. No. Understand." Before he could even finish his sentence, a huge fist made of rock appeared in front of his eyes, growing larger and larger. It fiercely smashed into Umar's head. The enormous force caused the stellar energy around Umar to shudder, and even the 4 legs of his Arabian steed sank into the earth. In the face of the combined attack of Li Sai and Huang Batian, even Umar felt an enormous pressure. "It's useless. None of you can kill me." Umar clenched his teeth, a savage light in his eyes. After blocking the attacks of these 2 top-class generals of the Tang dynasty, it was time for him to counterattack. But just as Umar gathered his stellar energy and raised his scimitar, there was a rumble. Without any warning, the ground beneath Umar's feet seemed to come to life. Under the control of an external force, the hard ground caved in and split apart. Umar's warhorse instantly lost its balance, and Umar and his horse plummeted to the ground. Huang Boshan's stone general ability was capable of shaking the earth and tearing it apart. Not good. Umar, who had been calm all this while, turned pale with fright, and his expression finally changed. But this was not the end. A moment later, a dark red ripple erupted from the rear of the Tang dynasty army and swept across the battlefield. Umar's steel-like aura suddenly shuddered as he was shaken by this force. and his aura abruptly dropped. The bane of General's halo. Chapter 883. A good chance. Sensing that Umar's aura had suddenly weakened, Li Sai and Huang Boshan's eyes brightened, and they joined forces to attack. At almost the same time, the galloping hooves of horses thundered in from all directions. Bang bang bang. The 5,000 Wuxian cavalry were like a torrential storm, crashing into Umar's stellar energy barrier. In the blink of an eye, Umar's energy was being consumed at an incredible rate, and it was rapidly weakening to an unbelievable level. 10 charges, 10 victories. When the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry used one of the 10 most powerful formations of the world on a single person, not even a renowned Arab general like Umar had any chance of escaping. No, Umar, famed for his heart of stone and his will, paled as an intense fear gripped his heart. His martial arts were fierce and majestic, enough to simultaneously block the combined attacks of Li Sai and Huang Batian. But when thousands of Wuxian cavalry charged together, not even Umar was a match. In his life of battle, this was the first time he had encountered such a large group of cavalry attacking a single person. No matter how powerful a single person was, they could not simultaneously deal with thousands of opponents. At this moment he finally sensed the scent of death. He wanted to mount and flee, but the stone general controlled by Huang Batian had taken complete control of the surrounding terrain. Boulders protruded from the ground and blocked his path, and the dense barrage of attacks from the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry sealed off his path of retreat. Boom! At the last moment, Umar only had time to muster all his strength and raise his famed Arabian scimitar to block the attack coming from above. Boom! A massive and sharp sword, taller than a man, furiously slashed down, cleaving through the dark clouds, cleaving through the sun and moon, cleaving through the pitch-black stellar energy around Umar's body. At the same time, it cleaved through the famed Arabian divine saber that had accompanied Umar for half his life. Ney's final neigh came from Umar's Arabian steed. Together with Umar, this stalwart steed was cleaved in two by Li Sai's Wuxia steel sword, its blood spraying the ground. To make an enemy of the Tang dynasty, so be it. Li Sai picked up Umar's corpse with his sword and lifted it high into the air. In that instant his aura surged, and his astral energy surged like a raging flame. Half of the battlefield's gazes were focused on him. At that moment, Li Sai was like a god from the heavens. Bang! Although they didn't understand what Li Sai was saying, Umar's death was a devastating blow to the Arab army on the Eastern Front. General is dead. General Umar has been killed by the Tang people. Everyone run. All the Arabs scrambled to be the first, panicked as the retreating army crashed into the army in the rear. This was so abrupt that the Arab army, which had just about finished adjusting and preparing to attack, was instantly thrown into disarray by this attack. Kill. Those who openly offend our strong Han will be executed, no matter how far away. Those who openly offend our strong Han will be executed, no matter how far away. For the Tang dynasty. Roars resounded over the battlefield as the 100,000 Qixi reinforcements charged like tigers descending a mountain, their eyes red as they charged toward the Arab ranks. At this stage, there was no need for tactics. In the face of the Arab army's complete collapse, the Tang army surged forward like a massive wave. The Wuxian cavalry, the Ballista army, the Qingganka, the armies of greater and lesser valor, the Annam Protectorate, the Qixi Protectorate, all of them transformed into a destructive flood that surged toward the 300,000 Arabs. Although the Arabs far outnumbered the Tang dynasty, and although some of the Arab soldiers in the rear were still trying to fight back, none of them could stop the army that had been completely routed. "My lord, look over there. The Arabs have been beaten back. How could this be?" On the distant walls of Talas, countless gazes stared in shock at the tens of thousands of retreating figures below the walls. They had long ago noticed the arrival of reinforcements, but the frenzied assault of the Arabs had left them with no time to worry about them. Moreover, after 2 months of fierce fighting, no one understood better than the Anshi Protectorate army just how powerful the Arabian army was. This was an army far stronger than any they had encountered before. With just 100,000 reinforcements and a considerable number of mercenaries, defeating more than 300,000 fierce and valiant Arab soldiers was practically a fantasy tale. But no one had expected that this new army of reinforcements would not only emerge victorious, they would even crush the Arab army with overwhelming strength. The city walls were deathly still. The Arabs that had been charging up the cloud ladders had receded like the receding tide. As they watched the distant reinforcements fiercely battling with the Arabs, the howls and shouts of battle had given them an unprecedented shock and shock, but also an unprecedented hope. Pass on my order. Open the gates and work with the Chishi Protectorate to launch a pincer attack on the Arabs. At this moment, a voice that sounded a little tired but still dignified and loud rang in everyone's ears. Gao Xianji rested his hands on his sword as he stood on the city walls, his body as immovable as a mountain. His armor was in tatters, and his entire body was stained with blood. Every part of his body was covered with deep scars from swords and sabers. The continuous fierce battles had consumed a great deal of his stellar energy and physical strength, but Gao Xianji's expression was calm. His tall and straight figure stood there, as if he would never fall. Yes, my lord. An excited messenger at Gao Xianji's side quickly left to carry out the order. A few moments later, there was a massive boom as the warped gates of the city of Talas swung open, and the Anshi Protectorate army charged out of the city. The 300,000 Arab soldiers had already been utterly routed by the Chishi reinforcements, and now that the Anshi Protectorate army was charging out of the city, the army was thrown into even greater chaos, tens of thousands of Arabs scrambling to escape. I didn't think that he really would come. Once there was no one left on the walls, Gao Xianji gave a long sigh, his expression much more relaxed. His stalwart body was also showing signs of deep exhaustion. Outside Talas, the Arab army was in complete disarray. Bastard! Stop! Kill them! Don't run! Kill your way back! Anyone who attacks the formation will die. The Arab commanders in the rear furiously roared as they attempted to stop the army's retreat. However, in the blink of an eye, even they themselves were swept up by the turbulence and dragged backwards. Retreat! Retreat! With the momentum lost, the Arabs finally gave the order to retreat from the more than 100,000 Tang soldiers pursuing them. The 300,000 soldiers left behind a trail of corpses as they retreated to the west like the receding tide. Marquis, we've won. In the rear, Su Qi turned to Wang Chong, a look of reverence on his face. We've won, but it's not complete victory, Wang Chong indifferently said. Leaving behind the confused Su Qi, he mounted the white-hoofed shadow and slowly rode forward. The battlefield was filled with the clattering of metal, the shouts of fighting, the neighing of horses, the screams of screams, and the twanging of bowstrings. Only Wang Chong remained calm, taking a leisurely stroll over the Arab corpses and broken weapons as he slowly made his way through the army. His soldiers followed closely behind him. Wherever Wang Chong went, he became the center of the battle. He was like a blazing sun descending from the heavens, his radiance so dazzling that it was impossible to ignore his existence. The Arabs retreated like a crazed tide. The Arabs had suffered grievous losses in this battle, and even now, they had probably never imagined that they would lose, and they had even lost a top-class general like Umar, the Archangel of Arabia. But to Wang Chong, everything had been within his expectations. From the start of this battle until now, whether it was dodging the Arab hunting falcons, killing the scouts roaming the perimeter, seizing the initiative to defeat Umar's 70,000 soldiers, and then using the retreating army in the east to charge at the Arab army of 300,000, all of this had been the result of his meticulous planning. In Wuxiang's city of steel and the Chishi Protectorate headquarters, Wang Chong had used the model of Talas to simulate countless times, and now, all of this was playing out in the real world, without the slightest error. A man who calculates victory before the battle has to calculate much. A man who calculates defeat before the battle has to calculate little. This was one of the simplest principles of the art of war. For the sake of this current victory, Wang Chong had prepared for countless days and nights, taking into account every detail. To the Arabs, this defeat might have been a coincidence, but to Wang Chong, it was inevitable. Reporting, the Arabs have retreated to their designated position. Should we continue the pursuit? As Wang Chong was slowly advancing, a messenger galloped over, dismounted in front of Wang Chong, and respectfully kneeled on the ground. There's no need. Seated on the white-hoofed shadow, Wang Chong gazed at the Arabs retreating from the western side of Talas and indifferently said, "There's no need. Inform Li Sai, Chun Bin, and the king of Gonka to stop the pursuit. In addition, order Zhang Shouji and the others to begin the operation." "Yes, Marquis." Upon hearing Wang Chong's order, the messenger mounted his horse and galloped off. Chapter 884. Mu. Behind the carriage were countless cows and sheep that formed mountains and seas. They also climbed over the hills and headed towards the battlefield. And then there were the carriages carrying provisions. At this point in the battle, the logistics personnel could finally enter the battlefield. With everything taken care of, Wang Chong turned his head and led his men toward the city of Talas. There, Wang Chong could already see a tall figure walking toward him. Lord Protector General. Not far from Gao Xianji, Wang Chong stopped. Although he had lived 2 lives and had once been revered as the war saint, this was the first time in Wang Chong's life that he had seen this illustrious wall of the empire, whose name could shake the western regions. Even in his last life, the war god of the western regions, Gao Xianji, had been an unreachable and unreachable existence to Wang Chong, a descendant of ministers and generals. Later on, when the calamity broke out and Wang Chong rose like a comet to reverse the tides, this legendary great general of the western regions had long since fallen from the skies of the Tang dynasty. Thus, from start to finish, Wang Chong had never had the chance to meet one of the most illustrious great generals of the empire. Refined and handsome, this was Wang Chong's first impression of Gao Xianji. Although Gao Xianji's breathing was in disarray, his body covered in wounds, and his complexion haggard from the repeated battles, his every movement exuded a grand bearing that stood out even amongst great generals. It was rumored that Gao Xianji had admired the culture of the Tang dynasty since he was a child, and he had once spent 7 years studying in the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong didn't know if this rumor was true or not, but from the bearing Gao Xianji exuded, he could tell that it was most likely true. Protector General Wang, words cannot express my gratitude. On behalf of all the Anqi Protectorate Army, this Gao thanks my lord. From afar, Gao Xianji looked at Wang Chong with a complicated expression. Under the gazes of countless people, he faced Wang Chong and bowed respectfully. In this battle of Talas, the Anqi Protectorate Army was at the end of its tether, and Gao Xianji was already prepared to die for his country if his entire army was wiped out. If not for Wang Chong's timely arrival with Qixi's reinforcements, the Anqi Protectorate Army might have become history. Wang Chong was 1 generation younger than Gao Xianji, so his ascension to the position of Qixi Protector General was a subject of much debate, at least amongst the Protector Generals and great generals of the empire. For someone of Gao Xianji's status to address Wang Chong as Protector General was enough to express his respect and acknowledgement. Lord Protector General, there is no need to be so polite. This has always been Wang Chong's duty. Lord Protector General, what are the casualties in the city? A strange light flashed through Wang Chong's eyes, clearly sensing that Gao Xianji was referring to him in a special manner. We lost more than half of our men in this battle. In addition, there are more than 4,000 wounded in the city, and we lack enough Jinchuang medicine and rations. Gao Xianji said, a hint of sadness in his eyes. The Anqi Protectorate Army had never lost a battle in the western regions, but this time, it had suffered an unprecedented wound. It would probably take a very long time to recover. Understood. Wang Chong nodded, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. As for the Jinchuang medicine and rations, Lord Protector General need not worry. I have already brought enough supplies. Kong Xian, deliver the Jinchuang medicine and rations into the city. Yes, Marquis. Kong Xian waved a hand behind him, and soldiers began to escort the carriages loaded with rations and Jinchuang medicine into the city. The city of Talas had been at war for 2 months, and all kinds of supplies were bound to be lacking. Wang Chong had long ago expected this, so he had already prepared the necessary supplies. Bang! As the carriages of rations and medicine were being delivered into the city of Talas, the clattering of metal, accompanied by shouts, came from the front of the battlefield. Upon hearing this voice, Gao Xianji and the Anqi generals around him subconsciously turned their heads. Up ahead, they saw furnaces blazing and plumes of smoke billowing. Hundreds of craftsmen were standing on special transport carriages, nailing massive silver-white steel modules into the earth. The clattering they had just heard had been the sound of them hammering. All the craftsmen busied themselves, and they seemed to be extremely familiar with their work. They were connecting and hammering, their movements orderly and efficient. In just a few moments, tall walls of silver-white steel had appeared outside Talas. Not only that, the Qixi reinforcements that had been pursuing the Arabs like a tidal wave had clearly slowed down their pursuit after passing through the steel walls. Moreover, there was a clear gap between them and the Arab army. Lord Protector General, this is... A bearded and swarthy general standing next to Gao Xianji suddenly said. The other Anqi generals around him were also dumbfounded. The more than 100,000 Qixi reinforcements, led by Wang Chong, currently had the upper hand. This was the perfect time to strike while the iron was hot and fiercely press forward. But for some reason, Wang Chong's Qixi reinforcements had clearly slowed down, and there was even a clear gap between them and the routed Arab army. Given Wang Chong's reputation and the performance of his army, such a low-level and major mistake should never have occurred. And then there were those busy craftsmen, and the silver-white steel walls. Everyone who saw this was confused. No one knew what Wang Chong and the Qixi reinforcements were doing. At the front of the army, Gao Xianji said nothing. He seemed to have his own speculations, but he also didn't seem to understand them. Wang Chong's fighting style was completely unlike that of an orthodox army. Moreover, for a battle of more than 100,000 soldiers, he had actually brought craftsmen and furnaces that had no fighting power. This was simply unimaginable. In the history of war, such a thing had never happened before. Only Wang Chong could do such a thing. This is General Cheng Qianli, correct? Wang Chong suddenly asked as he stared at this fierce and tyrannical general with a storm of energy. Lord Protector General recognizes me? Cheng Qianli was dumbfounded. I've heard of you. Wang Chong faintly smiled, but his mind was slightly thumping. In the Anqi Protectorate army, besides Gao Xianji, there had originally been 2 other valiant generals. One was the invincible great General Li Sai that he had recruited, and the other was this Cheng Qianli. Although Cheng Qianli had not reached Li Sai's level in the end, he had joined the army earlier and had more experience, so his cultivation was actually higher than Li Sai's. Cheng Qianli was tall and mighty, his face intimidating. On the battlefield, he was the number 2 figure of the Anqi Protectorate army, a peak brigadier general. He was probably even more formidable than Uzun's Dian Mangpoch. Thus, even though this was Wang Chong's first time meeting him, he had still recognized him at a glance. The fact that the Anqi Protectorate army had been able to hold out for so long was probably due to this. It's best to pursue the remnants of the enemy. Killing as many Arabs as possible is naturally a good thing. However, the Arabs have only been attacked by their own people and have fallen into chaos. They haven't lost their main force. Even if they had lost a large number of soldiers, they still had around 270 to 80,000 soldiers, more than twice as many as ours. Moreover, all of them were brave and skilled elites. In addition, the top-class Arab commanders, including Abu Muslim, had still not appeared. If my intelligence is correct, this Abbasid Caliphate governor of the East is a strategist. He can't be destroyed by a single defeat. Wang Chong's eyes were wise and farsighted. As the war saint of the highest status in the history of the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong was confident in facing any opponent, but he would never underestimate any opponent because of this. Moreover, Abu Muslim was an extremely difficult and formidable opponent. In Arabia, which revered battle and slaughter and emphasized strength, the fact that he had been able to walk through mountains of corpses and seas of blood To sit on the position of governor of the East was a testament to his strength. And even the most ordinary person, if they could experience 100 or even several thousand fierce battles, would eventually become a top-class great general. Defeating one of Abu Muslim's elite generals was not the same as defeating Abu Muslim. This Abbasid Caliphate governor of the East was known as the governor of iron and blood. Not only was he astonishingly powerful, he was also extremely astute. He would not be easy to deal with. Although Wang Chong had never met him before, when Wang Chong had first entered the Qixi Protectorate, the two had already exchanged blows. This governor of iron and blood coveted the Tang dynasty far more than Wang Chong had imagined. Before the war with the Tang dynasty had even begun, his tentacles had already extended as far as Qixi. Buzz! Wang Chong's words instantly silenced all the Anqi generals, their faces solemn. The name Abu Muslim was like a curse. After fighting at Talas for 2 months, no one understood this person better than the Anqi generals. As the most elite force of the empire, the Anqi Protectorate army had been proud, confident, and valiant before entering Talas. The Anqi Protectorate army had always believed itself to be invincible and invincible, until it encountered these courageous and fearless Arabs. If not for the high and thick walls of the city of Talas, the Anqi Protectorate army would not have been able to last so long in the face of the more than 300,000 Arab soldiers, far stronger than Mengshi Zhao and Izan. But Lord Protector General, although Abu Muslim is very formidable, not even he could have predicted Lord Protector General's arrival and the rapid collapse of the eastern battlefield. If he wasn't even prepared for this battle, we might really be able to use this opportunity to completely defeat the Arabs. A tranquil West general clenched his fists and could not help but say in excitement. Chapter 885. Wang Chong smiled and said nothing, only glanced at the other members of Anqi. Su Yang, don't speak nonsense. The situation on the battlefield is treacherous and involves the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers. Do you think you can do whatever you want? Protector General Wang is correct. We truly can't let our guard down against a powerful foe like the Arabs. Vice Protector General Cheng Qianli said, after a few moments of serious thought. Although he very much wanted to finish off the Arabs in one fell swoop, even he had to admit that Wang Chong was correct. The Arabs had only suffered a minor defeat. If the Arabs really only had this much skill, they would never have been able to force the Protector General and the Anqi Protectorate army into this state. The Protector General had even prepared to lead the Anqi Protectorate army in a final battle with the Arabs, sacrificing himself for the country. Pride was sure to lead the defeated army. This battle did not only concern the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers, but also the fate of the western regions, the safety of Qixi, Longxi, and even the capital. Such an important matter could not be decided by emotion. Wang Chong glanced at Cheng Qianli, a hint of praise in his eyes. Wang Chong had never interacted with Cheng Qianli before, and did not understand him very well. But from these words, he could tell that this brigadier general of the Tang dynasty was not only a martial artist, but also a master of strategy. At the very least, he was not the sort to be easily swayed by emotion. In truth, besides what I just said, there's another reason. They're banners. Wang Chong smiled and turned his head, his face brimming with confidence. Everyone's hearts trembled as they turned to look in the direction the Arabs had fled. The black Arab war banners were scattered all over the army, but all of them were confused by these war banners, not understanding what Wang Chong was up to. No matter what Abu Muslim is up to, this doesn't seem like the sign of an army being routed. If he really wants to do something, he should work harder and put in more effort. Wang Chong had a look of knowing everything like the back of his hand, and his eyes looked extremely wise. Boom! Wang Chong's words caused all the Anqi generals, including the people at Wang Chong's side, to tremble in shock. They only knew that Wang Chong had arranged for the troops to retreat once the pursuit had reached a certain point, but they didn't know that there was such an inside story. And he had no idea that the Black Arab War banner was hiding such a secret. Indeed, the mention of Wang Chong's warning made everyone turn their attention to the Black Arab War banners. Even though the Arabs were retreating in defeat, they still seemed to possess some sort of order. No matter what, this did not look like a panicked, chaotic, and utterly defeated army retreating. Hiss! Upon realizing this, everyone's eyelids twitched violently, and they sucked in a breath of cold air. None of them could say a word. Qianli, Protector General Wang is correct. Abu Muslim is not that easy to defeat. He has already laid a trap for us. Pass on my order. Have the soldiers retreat. At this moment, Gao Xinji's dignified voice resounded in everyone's ears. A trap? The officers around him were dumbfounded. Lord Protector General is wise. Wang Chong faintly smiled and nodded. Gao Xinji truly lived up to his reputation as the war god of the western regions. He was a veteran of many battles and extremely sensitive to the various changes on the battlefield. It was clear that he had also seen through Abu Muslim's intentions. Suki, pass on my order. Have the army retreat and cease the pursuit. Suki gave his assent and hurriedly left. In the distance, the more than 100,000 Qixi soldiers and the Anxi Protectorate army slowly retreated like the receding tide, ceasing the pursuit. The two groups of people were completely separated. At the same time, several li to the west of Talas, in a place that could not be seen, few people noticed that the first group of Arab soldiers that had retreated had begun to set up an arced ambush along the rugged ground. Nearly 100,000 Arab cavalry were lying in wait around this ambush. These cavalry had been the first to withdraw from the battlefield, and the terrain made it impossible to notice them from afar. Why aren't they here yet? What's the rush? Lord Governor has already planned everything out. Once they enter our encirclement, their deaths will be upon them. Haha, it's still Lord Governor who's formidable. Even in death, these Tang people would never have imagined that just when they were on the verge of victory, they would be completely annihilated by us. It's just a pity for Umar, but for the Empire, it was worth sacrificing him. All of you shut up. The Tang people are about to arrive. Hurry and get ready. At the very back of the ambush circle were several Arab generals with chilling eyes and thick body hair, dressed in black heavy armor. They were looking forward, their eyes brimming with killing intent. The Arabian Empire had been established for several hundred years, and through its constant conquest and expansion, it had developed its own unique military tactics. If the Tang people continued to hole up in the city, the Arabs truly wouldn't have much of a way to deal with them. Although the Arabian Empire's cavalry was unparalleled in the world, it was not skilled in sieging cities. All it could do was drag it out and attack city after city. Compared to other factions, it did not have much of an advantage. But once the Tang people entered the wilderness, everything changed. Whether they had the upper hand or the lower hand, the Arabs had their own unique tactics. What's going on? Why are the Tang people retreating? Suddenly, the Arab generals grimaced and straightened their backs. Absurd. How could this be? Why did they suddenly stop pursuing? Did they see through it? Impossible. They're in the middle of a great victory. How could they give up? The Arab generals had grim expressions on their faces. They could clearly see that the more than 100,000 Tang people had suddenly retreated without warning, and all of them were dumbfounded. In the past, they had used this same tactic to defeat many powerful foes. When they were at their happiest and proudest, they would defeat and kill them. But to suddenly retreat when they were clearly on the verge of victory was something they had never encountered before. Just what's going on with the leader of the Tang people? The group of people were completely speechless. Buzz. At the same time, in another direction, a figure as tall as a mountain suddenly stood up slowly. His gaze was sharp, and a terrifying aura that could collapse mountains erupted from his body. In that instant, the earth rumbled and the heavens shook. The entire earth seemed to be unable to bear his weight, and began to buzz and tremble. How could this be? Abu Muslim's dark brown eyes stared into the distance, an astonishing cold light exploding from them. In the fierce winds, Abu Muslim's aura began to undulate, and his enormous pressure pressed down like a mountain range. All the surrounding guards lowered their heads as if they were facing a god, their bodies shivering in fear and unease. In this war with the Tang dynasty, whether it was the fall of the Shur kingdom, the fall of Talas, or the long and drawn-out battles, Abu Muslim had always remained calm and composed. But at this moment, his steely face finally began to ripple with unprecedented seriousness. Just what kind of person is the leader of this Tang army? It had been a very long time since Abu Muslim had encountered an opponent like this. Ever since he had joined the army, starting out as a nameless soldier of the Arabian Empire, and eventually becoming the governor of the East, expanding the empire's territory to Talas and the western regions, he had defeated one foe after another. It had been a very long time since Abu Muslim had encountered an opponent that gave him such a strange feeling. Although he still hadn't seen the commander of the Tang dynasty reinforcements, this invisible clash had already left Abu Muslim with an ill foreboding. His opponent this time was far more formidable than he had imagined, far more difficult to deal with than any of his previous opponents. But this was only the beginning. "Lord Governor, look over there." A thin Arab general with a high nose, brimming with strength and wildness, suddenly pointed into the distance. Following his finger, they could clearly see many ordinary craftsmen at the front of the Tang people's army, thousands of blazing furnaces, and silver walls of steel that resembled fish scales rising around Talas. In a flash, all the Arab generals felt an indescribably strange sensation. The battlefield was the most dangerous place, where life and death could be decided by a single thought. No one had ever dared to bring these non-combatant craftsmen onto the battlefield, as doing so would only be sending them to their deaths. And those silver walls of steel, no one knew what these Tang people were doing. They had participated in so many battles, defeated so many opponents, destroyed and conquered so many countries, but the Arabs had never encountered such a strange battle. "Pass on my order to Amur. Have him lead the Bakr cataphracts to attack the Tang people," Abu Muslim suddenly ordered as he stared into the distance. "Yes, Lord Governor." An Arab messenger quickly turned his horse around and hurried away. "Marquis, they really did stop." In the distance, Sukhi, mounted on a Turkic warhorse outside the walls of Talas, couldn't help but say as he looked into the distance. At the height of the battle, everyone's eyes were focused on the panicked Arab soldiers closest to the battlefield, but they weren't paying much attention to the overall situation. But now that the order to retreat had been given and the soldiers had calmed down, they could clearly see that the Arabs were retreating more and more slowly, and in the rear, the Arab soldiers were even showing signs of stopping. They were not continuing to flee. Chapter 886. Wang Chong only faintly smiled. This was all within his expectations. The Arabs were extremely crafty. Although they had powerful cavalry and a formidable army, they liked to feign surrender. Only the Arab army would set up an ambush to lure the enemy in while retreating. In his last life, after the Arabs defeated the Tang dynasty, they sent their strongest Mamelukes into the Uzun Plateau to invade the Uzun Empire. In the end, they were met with the desperate resistance of Dian Mangpoj and the White Braves. After suffering a severe setback, the Arabs had used this tactic to turn defeat into victory, dealing a heavy blow to the main force of the Uzun Empire. Wang Chong remembered this part of history like the back of his hand, and he knew these crafty Arab tactics like the back of his hand. More importantly, as the war saint of his generation, Wang Chong was extremely sensitive to the various changes on the battlefield. Even the tiniest of clues was enough for him to notice, and the Arab war banners were still standing straight, and did not appear to be in the slightest of defeat. "Pass on my order. Speed up the construction," Wang Chong said. "Yes." Sukhi received the order, and a group of horses quickly departed. These Arabs were far more crafty than he had imagined. This war concerned the safety of the more than 100,000 soldiers, and all of the western regions and Chishi. This war was of the utmost importance, and everyone was doing their utmost to assist Wang Chong, carrying out Wang Chong's every order. As far as Sukhi could see, Chen Bin, Chung Sanyuan, Zhang Ke, Su Shixian Kong Xian, and the people of Deflecting Blade Manor were all busy preparing the battlefield. "Hiya!" Sukhi urged his horse forward, quickly vanishing into the ranks of the Arab army. Rumble! Not long after Sukhi left, the earth quaked and dust churned as a powerful force of Arab cavalry, Their war horses branded with the image of two black crescent moons rode out from the retreating Arab army. The aura of this cavalry was extremely powerful. Each of the riders on the horses had bulging muscles, and as they galloped, each of them was wrapped in a thick black mist. In front of this force of cavalry, the other fleeing Arab cavalry paled in comparison, like fireflies before the bright moon. 7,000 to 8,000 cavalrymen galloped as fast as lightning towards where Wang Chong and the others were. Lord Protector General, enemy attack. At almost the same time, an officer of the Anxi Protectorate Army galloped through the army toward Wang Chong. Sir, how should we deal with this? Wang Chong only smiled and glanced into the distance, his expression unperturbed. A trifling force of 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers would have little effect on the army, no matter what sort of legends the Arabs had in the past. The moment he arrived on the battlefield, these legends were doomed to come to an end. Tell Chun Bin that he can deal with this himself, Wang Chong said. Yes. The officer had not expected Wang Chong to give such an order, and his body trembled. Raising his head, he saw that Wang Chong was calm and composed, a faint smile on his lips as he looked at the distant battlefield, a confident look on his face that victory was in his grasp. The officer froze for a moment, but Wang Chong's mood had infected him. Calming down, his nervousness vanished, and he left to carry out the order. Ready! At the very front of the battlefield, Chun Bin stood motionless, his eyes focused on the battlefield. Across from him, a cloud of dust was rising more than 100 zhang into the air, and the ground was also trembling. Through the dust, Chun Bin could see Arab cavalry charging toward him like gods of death. Unlike any of the Arabs he had encountered before, Chun Bin felt an enormous pressure from this force of cavalry, a pressure that followed him like a storm, suffocating him. But whether it was Chun Bin, or the 3,000 ballista soldiers behind him, all of them were frozen in place like rocks. The might of a cavalry charge was publicly acknowledged to be unparalleled in the world. If such a force of cavalry charged over, the 3,000 ballista soldiers behind Chun Bin were certain to suffer grievous casualties. But everything had its vanquisher. Whether or not cavalry had once been the #1 soldier in the world, everything had changed the moment Chun Bin's ballista team had appeared. Clang! A cold light flashed. Chun Bin's expression was solemn as he raised the sword in his hand and pointed it forward. Creak creak. With Chun Bin's movements, the Han soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate Army stood at the very front of the ballistae and began to adjust the bolts. The sharp tips of the bolts were quickly aimed at the Bakr cataphracts. Qixi's ballista teams were divided into groups of 5. One person was responsible for adjusting the bolts, while the others were responsible for loading and assisting. Strangle formation. Charge. At the same time, a bloodthirsty and resounding order resounded through the army. In the center of the army, an Arab general with green eyes and a brown beard harshly shouted, "Rumble!" Stellar energy vibrated as a powerful wave of energy soared more than 100 zhang into the air. Amor was not the strongest general in the Arab army, but he was definitely the bravest and most fearless. The Bakr cataphracts were soldiers that Abu Muslim had recruited from the strategic stronghold of the Abbasid Caliphate. They were one of the elite cavalry units under Abu Muslim's command. Their greatest characteristic was their extremely thick armor, which could block the attacks of the vast majority of ballistae, bows, and arrows. Even the sharpest sabers would only be able to leave shallow marks on their bodies. In a large-scale melee, the Bakr cataphracts could often rely on their thick armor to charge into the densest and strongest areas of the enemy, scattering the enemy and disrupting their formation. They were one of the best offensive units of the Arab cavalry. In a single charge, the Bakr cataphracts would not only scatter the enemy's main force, they would also suffer minimal losses. This was an important reason why Abu Muslim had dispatched them. 80 zhang, 50 zhang, 40 zhang. As he got closer and closer, Chun Bin continued to calculate and concentrate. These Arab cavalry were extremely fast and terrifyingly powerful. The slightest mistake could result in the annihilation of the 3,000 ballista teams. Release. Just when the atmosphere was at its most tense, Chunbin swung his sword down heavily. Boom! There was a thunderous boom in the air. And the moment Chunbin swung down his sword, a thick ballista bolt, 1 zhang long, shot forward like a bolt of lightning. Nei! With a heaven-shaking neigh, blood sprayed into the air as the Arab warhorse, at the very front, was stabbed with a bowl-sized hole. The long ballista bolt pierced through the thick armor of the warhorse, pierced through the horse's forehead, emerged from the horse's rear, and then pierced through the second and third Arab horsemen. Only after reaching the fourth Arab horseman did the ballista bolt stop, leaving a long trail of blood in its wake that was both beautiful and terrifying. What thick armor! Chunbin's eyes widened at this sight. Ballistae and ballista bolts were the symbol of the Tang dynasty's finest craftsmanship and the strength of the country. Each ballista bolt had been tempered hundreds of times, requiring at least several months to be forged. Moreover, they had to go through several dozen procedures and be inscribed with many different inscriptions. In terms of value, these bolts were equivalent to a lump of gold. It was precisely for this reason that the ballistae and ballista bolts of the Tang dynasty were so terrifyingly powerful that they were regarded as important weapons of the country. When dealing with other Arabs, Chunbin's ballista bolts had been able to pierce through 7 or 8 Arab horsemen, sometimes even 10 some. But against this unknown elite Arab horseman, each ballista bolt was only able to pierce through 4 horsemen before reaching their limit. He had never encountered such a situation before. But Chunbin's eyes only blinked for a moment before returning to normal. No matter how thick and sturdy the armor of these Arab cavalry was, they were doomed to be like a mantis trying to stop a chariot in front of the 3,000 ballistae. The second formation. Fire! Chunbin raised his sword and gave another order. Bum bum bum. Tens of thousands of ballista bolts exploded into the air, engulfing the Bakr cataphracts. In Nei, wave after wave of Bakr cataphracts fell to Chunbin's ballista army. Fire! Wave after wave of ballista bolts rained down. Chunbin had divided the 3,000 ballista teams into 3 groups, with each group consisting of 1,000 ballista teams forming a formation. When one formation finished firing, another would take its place. Round after round, the ballista bolts fired in rapid succession, leaving no gaps at all. The 7,000 or 8,000 Bakr cataphracts suffered grievous casualties, none of them able to get within 10 zhang of the Tang dynasty. With Chunbin as the boundary, the area several hundred zhang in front of him had been transformed into a bloody battlefield. The neighing of horses, screams, collisions, and the rumbling of ballista bolts mixed into one. The corpses of the Bakr cataphracts were strewn everywhere. 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. The famed Bakr cataphracts of the Arabs were suffering heavy casualties at an astonishing rate in front of the 3,000 ballista teams. Retreat! Retreat! The Arab general Amor paled at this sight. The attacks of the Tang people had been too swift and fierce. Moreover, their unique cycle of firing and seamless attacks had made it impossible for the 8,000 Bakr cataphracts to reach the Tang people's ranks. The casualties were far too terrifying. Amor had never seen such a fierce and frightening assault force in his entire life. Rumble! The Bakr cataphracts had left as quickly as they had come. But while they had come from 7,000 or 8,000, they had left with less than 1,000. The famed Bakr army had been on the verge of extinction in this battle. Stop! Chunbin raised his sword, and the 3,000 ballista teams behind him immediately stopped firing. All of them silently took up orderly positions, as if they had never moved. This sort of strict discipline left a deep impression on anyone who saw it. The strength of the ballista army lay in its ability to attack and defend with the army, but it was actually less effective in pursuit. Chapter 887. The 100,000 Chishi reinforcements quickly calmed down. The only thing left was the thick stench of blood in the air, and the corpses of the Bakr cataphracts strewn in front of the defensive line, a testament to the ferocity and power of the Tang dynasty. There's no need to worry about the other side. Hurry up and finish the fortifications. Begin treating the wounded and counting the casualties. Repair the ballistae. Inspect all the equipment again. As orders were passed down, the Tang dynasty army busied itself, but it was also orderly. Everything was proceeding according to Wang Chang's plan. Meanwhile, with the heavily wounded Bakr cataphracts under Amor's command, the Arabs retreated like the tide, no longer probing the enemy. Lord Governor Amor failed. The Tang people did not pursue. Ziyad said from next to Abu Muslim. Ziyad was about 36 years old. He had a short mustache and brown eyes that were as sharp as swords. As the Arab deputy governor of the East, as well as Abu Muslim's aide and subordinate, Ziyad had an important role to play in this operation. Although he was not as strong as Abu Muslim, Ziyad was still a peak brigadier general, a top-class expert on the verge of stepping into the great general level. Not only that, Ziyad was also a rare tactician. Abu Muslim had always relied heavily on his intelligence and strategy. In the previous battle, Ziyad had been leading the army and arranging for the soldiers to retreat, doing his best to minimize the losses. Thus, he had only appeared at Abu Muslim's side now. Ziyad, what do you think of this new commander of the Tang dynasty? After some time, Abu Muslim looked forward and spoke. His eyes were deep and his expression calm, making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. I don't know. We know nothing about him. Ziyad's brow was tightly creased, a pensive look in his eyes. This person isn't from Anxi. For this battle, Gao Xianji has brought all the top-class generals of Anxi. It was impossible for anyone to be more powerful than him. He must have been sent by the emperor of the Tang dynasty. I remember that we had sent spies and scouts into the interior of the Tang dynasty to investigate. But I don't know what happened. Those spies and scouts lost contact with each other, and they never sent back any news. I'm afraid that they were discovered and eliminated by the Tang people. Now that I think about it, it's really a pity. As for this new commander of the Tang people, although we don't have his information and can't see where he is, judging from his performance, this person has probably seen through our ambush. Moreover, the army he leads is also very powerful. Previously, the Tang people's army led by Gao Xianji also used that kind of huge crossbow, but its power was not as terrifying. His accuracy and shooting speed are not comparable to Gao Xianji's. I have a feeling that this new commander-in-chief is even more powerful than Gao Xianji, and he's even more difficult to deal with. You think he's even stronger than that Anxi war god? Abu Muslim slightly frowned, rather surprised by Ziyad's assessment. In the last 2 months of fierce battle, Gao Xianji and his Anxi protectorate army had dealt a heavy blow to the Arabs. Before this, Abu Muslim and the entire Arabian Empire had the lofty ambition to sweep through the western regions with an army of 300,000 and even occupy the Tang dynasty, accomplishing a feat that had never been accomplished by any caliph. But a trifling Gao Xianji and the city of Talas had dealt a severe blow to Abu Muslim and his powerful Arab army. Although they were enemies, Abu Muslim would never belittle his opponents. Gao Xianji truly did have the qualifications to be his opponent, even though Abu Muslim's desire to kill this man had never wavered. But now, Ziyad actually believed that this new Arab commander was even more formidable than Gao Xianji. In terms of strength, I haven't seen him yet, so I can't make a judgment for now. But in terms of tactics and strategy, my intuition is that Gao Xianji really can't compare to him. Ziyad solemnly said. Gao Xianji was a tenacious opponent. The fact that he had managed to delay the Arab army for 2 months was proof enough. But Gao Xianji had not relied on his own tactics and strategy, but on the high and thick walls of the city of Talas. Although the battle had lasted for a long time, the true losses had been far less severe. On the other hand, the commander of the Tang dynasty, who had yet to show his face, had killed Umar in a single clash, dealt a heavy blow to Amor's Bakr cataphracts, and had even killed nearly 100,000 Arab soldiers in this first clash. And this time, the Tang dynasty's reinforcements had only been a little more than 100,000. This alone was enough for Ziyad to place an unprecedented amount of importance on this new commander of the Tang dynasty. Moreover, this new commander hadn't even borrowed the strength of any city. Abu Muslim instantly fell silent, a grave look in his eyes. After fighting side by side with Ziyad for so many years, Abu Muslim had always placed great trust in Ziyad's judgment and intuition. In their 10-some years together, Abu Muslim had never seen Ziyad give such a high evaluation of an enemy commander before he even met him. Rumble. As he was thinking, a boom came from up ahead, completely different from any of the previous booms, and it quickly attracted the attention of Abu Muslim and Ziyad. The two of them raised their heads. In the distance, they could see countless craftsmen and soldiers working together in the rear of the Tang army. They were methodically installing strange, huge, silver rectangular boxes covered with holes on the surface onto the tall steel walls. The two highest Arab commanders grimaced at this sight, their eyes brimming with anger. Although they didn't know what sort of secrets these silver chests held, their experience allowed them to immediately tell that they were some sort of powerful defensive equipment. The combination of these silver chests and the steel walls made it obvious what the Tang people were doing. In front of more than 200,000 Arab soldiers, they were brazenly constructing fortifications on a large scale. This was a blatant provocation. To the west of the Tsong Mountains, Arabia was synonymous with terror and destruction, and all empires and factions would pale at the mere mention of its name. In all of history, no opponent had ever dared to humiliate an Arab army of more than 200,000. Bastard! Ziyad clenched his fists, his eyes exploding with killing intent. Although Abu Muslim said nothing, his face had also turned gloomy. Lord Governor, have our entire army press forward and completely crush the Tang people's army. They're too impudent. A voice came from the side, and all the Arab commanders around Abu Muslim turned to look, their eyes blazing with fury. The Arabs were renowned for their bravery and skill in battle. Umar's death could not represent the entire Arab army, and the true main force of the Arab army had yet to move. Once they did, the battle would be completely different. Enough! Abu Muslim suddenly bellowed, his expression as cold as ice. In a flash, all the Arab commanders fell silent, lowering their heads with respect in their eyes. I have my own plans. Pass on my order. All soldiers are to retreat and reorganize. Yes, Lord Governor. A messenger next to him said, his voice trembling. Abu Muslim's eyes were spitting fire, but he said no more. His eyes were constantly shifting as he stared at the Tang dynasty army. No one could tell what he was thinking. The Tang people had to be eliminated, and the western regions had to be brought under the Arabian Empire. He would be the first governor of the East to defeat the Tang dynasty. But before that, every decision had to be made with caution. He could not be rash. Flap flap. Just when Abu Muslim was preparing to reorganize his army and launch an attack against the Tang people, he suddenly heard the flapping of wings. Whoosh! A black messenger pigeon flew down like a bolt of lightning and landed on Abu Muslim's arm. Caw-caw! The black messenger pigeon began to cry out as it slowly walked on Abu Muslim's arm. On its right leg was a rolled-up piece of white paper. Buzz! The other Arab commanders didn't react to this black messenger pigeon, but Abu Muslim and Ziyad glanced at each other and saw the shock and astonishment in each other's eyes. Abu Muslim took the letter from the black messenger pigeon's leg and slowly unfurled it. After glancing at it, his expression instantly turned strange. Lord Governor, what does the letter say? Ziyad took a step forward and asked. Abu Muslim said nothing, only handed over the letter. This. After reading the contents of the letter, Ziyad's expression turned strange, and his brown eyes slowly began to shine. All soldiers, hear my order. The army is to organize and delay the operation. Tomorrow we will fight the Tang people. Yes, my lord. Meanwhile, outside the city of Talas, Marquis, they're retreating. The Arabs are really retreating this time. Next to Wang Chong, Zhang Ke placed a hand over his forehead as he watched the Arab army retreat like a receding tide, a look of excitement on his face. Zhang Ke was not a fighter, so after the aerial battle, he had remained at Wang Chong's side. Su Kai, Chen Burang, Sun Jiming, Zhuang Buping, Qi Weisi, Zhao Jingdian, and even Wang Chong's father Wang Yan and big brother Wang Fu had all been sent to the front lines to command the army. The only people left at Wang Chong's side were Zhang Ke and a few others. It's not that simple. This battle has only just begun. Chapter 888. The Arabs had already withdrawn a great distance, but they had not retreated to the strategic fortress of Khorasan. Instead, they stared at the Tang army from a distance, their intentions obvious. It was the Arab style to fight to the last man, or to lose 3/4 of their soldiers. They would never easily retreat. This was also why Arabia was so troublesome and terrifying. It was also why the kingdoms of the western regions viewed Arabia as a destroyer. But this time, they had run into the Tang dynasty and Wang Chong. For this decisive battle with the Arabs, Wang Chong had prepared for a long time. He had prepared a large number of weapons and provisions, and he had even led an army of more than 100,000, equipped with ballistae, Wuxia steel weapons, meteoric metal armor, and other such weapons. His will and ability to fight were no weaker than theirs. Two empires, only one will survive. Abu Muslim, the empire that survives can't be Arabia. Wang Chong's eyes flickered. Wang Chong's expression was relaxed, but he was thinking back to the Stone of Destiny's words. Nothing was accidental. In this world, it was rare for two great empires to coexist at the same time, and even if they did, they would only exist for a very short period of time. In his last life, the Tang dynasty had fought with Arabia at Talas and suffered a crushing defeat, losing the western regions. From then on, the Tang dynasty's efforts to expand and invade the outside world were transformed into an obsession with internal strife, and the civilization of the Central Plains continued to wane. Wang Chong had always believed that this was a coincidence, but the Stone of Destiny had revealed that this was far from the case. Behind him was the western regions, the Tang dynasty. Whether for the sake of the Tang dynasty, or for the prosperity of the Central Plains for the next several thousand years, Wang Chong could not retreat. As these thoughts flew through his mind, Wang Chong quickly regained his composure. Zhang Ke, send out your birds to keep an eye on the movements of the Arabs at all times. In addition, I will arrange for an archer square to work with you. Once the Arab hunting falcons arrive, the archer square will work with you to kill them all. Wang Chong said. The Arabian hunting falcons were extremely fast and ferocious. Although Zhang Ke had wiped out a wave, it had only been one of the Arabian hunting falcons. Zhang Ke's eagle team alone was far from enough to deal with the entire Arab hunting army. Using the ground and air forces to launch a pincer attack was a tactic that Wang Chong had specially designed for the Arabs. Yes, Marquis. Zhang Ke accepted the order and left. In the army of the Tang dynasty, there had never been anyone like Wang Chong who valued aerial surveillance as much as he did. Zhang Ke did not disappoint. The eagle team he led played an increasingly important role in Wang Chong's battles. This included the war with the Arabs. If Zhang Ke had not destroyed the Arab hunting falcons ahead of time, the outcome of the war might have been completely different. Once Zhang Ke left, Wang Chong calmed down and turned his eyes to the vast sea of Arab soldiers. In this battle, one of Wang Chong's greatest foes had yet to appear. During the assault of the Arab Bakr cataphracts, Wang Chong had vaguely sensed their will. This was a clash in the air, as well as an invisible contest. Abu Muslim, Wang Chong could clearly sense that the enemy was using that group of cavalry to probe him. And Wang Chong had also clearly displayed his will through the ballista army. The first clash between these two commanders had ended with Wang Chong's victory, but Wang Chong was well aware that this was far from over. Protector General Wang, is this the steel wall? Just at this moment, a dignified voice rang out. Gao Xinji suddenly spoke as he stood at the side with his back ramrod straight, his gaze looking ahead. Wang Chong froze, and then he smiled and nodded. Yes. At these words, Gao Xinji's eyes exploded with a sharp light, a strange light flitting through his pupils. In the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had used his steel wall tactics to defeat the combined army of Daluan Ruozhen and Jelifeng. This matter had long ago caused a huge uproar throughout the world, and in the Battle of the Triangular Gap, Wang Chong had established a steel fortress on the Uzun Plateau, and used it to defeat Dusong Mangpoch and Dian Mangpoch. Wang Chong's unique tactics had become so famous that even Gao Xinji had heard of them in the distant western regions. But this was the first time Gao Xinji had actually seen them. Not bad. A hint of surprise flashed through Gao Xianji's eyes as he heartily praised. The most formidable aspect of the Arabs is their cavalry. By using this tactic to divide them, we can truly destroy the Arab formation. Without the advantage of a formation, the cavalry will not be as formidable. Lord Protector General's thoughts are bold and imaginative, able to think of places that ordinary people cannot. It is no wonder that you were favored by His Divine Majesty at such a young age, and became the youngest Protector General of the Empire. However, the city of Talas is surrounded by wilderness that is extremely advantageous to cavalry. Wouldn't it be better to enter the city and use the thick walls of the city of Talas to defend it? These last words revealed Gao Xianji's true intentions. When Wang Chong led his army to the city and routed the Arabs, Gao Xianji had originally believed that Wang Chong would lead his army into the city and use the city of Talas to defend it with him. But now, it seemed that Wang Chong was arranging his army and constructing fortifications outside the city, with no intention of entering the city at all. This was completely different from Gao Xianji's plan. In Gao Xianji's view, Wang Chong's plan was far too risky. There were no natural strongholds to rely on, and the terrain was unfavorable. But since Wang Chong had come to save him, and was of equal status to him, Gao Xianji could not directly point this out, so he had used the City of Steel to tactfully express his intentions. Given Gao Xianji's status, he was already showing Wang Chong considerable respect. Haha, Lord Protector General, I know what you mean. Wang Chong faintly smiled, his eyes looking forward, his demeanor relaxed and exuding a natural charm. I naturally know that the walls of the city of Talas are high and thick, and the terrain is advantageous, but there are some things that we must do, some risks that we must take. The Arabs have come with a torrential momentum, and their desire is not limited to the Shur Kingdom. The western regions and the Tang dynasty are their true goal. There is a saying that goes, when two enemies meet on a narrow path, the courageous will prevail. In this world, the only one that can contend with the Tang dynasty is the Arabian Empire to the west of the Tsong Mountains. Lord Protector General should be well aware of this. If we cannot thoroughly defeat them and make them understand the terrifying power of the Tang dynasty, then there will be no end of trouble. This world is one of survival of the fittest, where the strong prey on the weak. Our Tang dynasty was able to rule the western regions through our own strength. The Arabs were able to expand to the west of the Tsong Mountains and encroach on the Tang dynasty through their own strength. Whether my lord has realized it or not, from the moment we arrived here, everything was decided. In this battle, if we dare to enter the city and show the slightest fear, the Arabs will swarm in, and we will lose the initiative, handing over the advantage we worked so hard to build. Lord Protector General should understand that the Tang dynasty no longer has any soldiers to deploy. At this point, Wang Chong paused, his gaze slowly sweeping over the crowd. All was quiet. All the Anqi generals, including the generals at Wang Chong's side, had been captivated by Wang Chong's words, all of them solemnly looking at him. All the soldiers of the Tang dynasty, from the east of the Tsong Mountains to Qixi and Wuxiang, had been mobilized. Just as Wang Chong had said, Talas was probably the last line of defense. If we win this battle, we can protect the western regions for several decades, or at least slow down the advance of the Arabs. Lord Protector General should know that the army led by Abu Muslim is only the soldiers of that empire in the east. This empire has at least 3 times the number of soldiers in the rear. We don't have many choices. If we lose, Anqi and Qixi will change sides, and even Longxi will crumble to the threat of the Arabs. All of these are things that we must consider. Wang Chong sternly said. One last glance at the commander-in-chief of the Anqi Protectorate Army, Gao Xianji. Gao Xianji said nothing, but his brows were deeply furrowed. As a general, his duty was to lead his soldiers into battle, to win battles, and to win battles after battles. This was why Gao Xianji had said those words and entered the city of Talas. But Wang Chong's standpoint was completely different from his own. Wang Chong's strategic vision and considerations were far more profound. After careful consideration, even Gao Xianji had to admit that there were many aspects of this war that he had not considered thoroughly. I understand. Gao Xianji gave a serious nod. He gave Wang Chong a deep glance, acting like he was meeting this 17-year-old youth of the Tang dynasty for the first time. Seeing once is better than hearing 100 times. There had been many misunderstandings between Gao Xianji and Wang Chong, including the regional commander's incident and Wang Chong's assault on Wuxiang. In this meeting, Gao Xianji had treated Wang Chong so courteously, partly because Wang Chong had been willing to put aside their former enmity and brave the danger of leading an army to reinforce him. As for Wang Chong's military skills and other aspects, although Wang Chong had been able to defeat Umar, as a top-class great general on the level of Gao Xianji, who had won countless victories and had experienced far more than ordinary generals, he had not left a very deep impression on Wang Chong. But when Wang Chong said these words, revealing his comprehensive plans for the Battle of Talas, Gao Xianji felt for the first time that this youth possessed a vast breadth of knowledge, a strategic and long-term vision that could make any protector general or great general lose their luster. Astounding talent. Gao Xianji had always been a proud man, but he had never imagined that he would see another person, and a youth at that, a talent that far surpassed his own. Everything will be done according to Lord Protector General's wishes. If Lord Protector General has anything that requires the cooperation of the Anqi Protectorate Army, this Gao will give it his all. Anqi Vice Protector General Cheng Qianli's eyes flashed with cold light as he stepped forward, his sword pointed at Wan Hapeluo's barbaric god axe. But in a flash of light, Wan Hapeluo seemed to have predicted that Cheng Qianli would use this move, and he twisted his body to dodge Cheng Qianli's attack. You! Cheng Qianli's expression froze, and he couldn't help but stop. Cheng Qianli was a peak brigadier general of the empire, extremely powerful. Although Wan Hapeluo couldn't compare to Cheng Qianli, he wasn't too far off. More importantly, Wan Hapeluo had led the Karluk tribe and fought alongside the Anqi Protectorate Army for more than 10 years, so he had a deep understanding of the Anqi Protectorate Army. This was why Cheng Qianli's attack had failed. Wan Hapeluo dodged past Cheng Qianli, and with no more obstacles in front of him, the barbaric god axe in his hand fiercely swung down at Wang Chong. Wan Hapeluo, you've come at just the right time. A furious roar resounded through the sky. While everyone else was stunned by this sight, only Wang Chong remained calm, apparently having expected this. Buzz. As everyone looked on, Wang Chong's eyes exploded with cold light. For a radius of 3 zhang around him, the space around him began to twist and distort. Waves of energy began to blur as the images of the sun and moon, one gold and one red, appeared. Vast heaven-earth art. Great yin-yang art. Wang Chong's body suddenly shot forward, the two strongest techniques of the great yin-yang heaven creation art clashing with Wan Hapeluo's barbaric god splits the heavens. Boom! 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 Shockwaves surged, and all the air within a radius of several hundred feet exploded in all directions. In a few short moments, Wang Chong and Wan Hapeluo were like two primordial beasts, exchanging dozens of blows. Boom! After the final exchange, Wan Hapeluo's body swayed as he was sent flying. Meanwhile, Wang Chong was like a rock in the raging sea, stopping his attack and remaining motionless on the spot. The moment Wang Chong stopped his attack, the raging waves of air calmed down. The great yin-yang heaven creation art's ability to control the environment far surpassed any other art. Bastard! I'll tear you apart. On the other side, Wan Hapeluo's eyes were red as he gnashed his teeth. His body had barely landed on the ground when he staggered back a few steps, but he immediately stomped his feet and charged forward like a storm. Stop! A thunderous roar, suffused with boundless authority, resounded in everyone's ears. Before Wan Hapeluo could get very far rumble, the void shook, and a mountainous wave of energy locked onto Wan Hapeluo. Wan Hapeluo, brimming with rage and killing intent, was locked down by this energy, causing his body to sink and his speed to drop. When he sensed the fury in this energy, Wan Hapeluo's body trembled, and he came to a halt. In all of Talas in the Tang dynasty's army, There was only one person who could exert this sort of pressure on him. Gao Xianji, Lord Protector General. This bastard dares to detain our tribesmen in the rear. No matter what, I must kill him today. If my lord still remembers our past friendship, then help me kill him to vent the hatred in the hearts of the tens of thousands of Karluks. Wan Hapeluo fiercely turned his head to Anshi Protector General Gao Xianji, his eyes hateful. The Karluks were valiant and skilled in battle, and they were famed throughout the western regions. All the tribes revered them, and as an ally of the Tang dynasty in the western regions, Wan Hapeluo was like the noon sun, with almost no one daring to lightly provoke them. But Wan Hapeluo had never imagined that while he was fighting beyond the borders, he would be attacked from the rear. All his tribesmen, whether old or weak, women or children, even their cows, sheep and horses, had been captured by the Tang people and brought to the battlefield as hostages. And the main culprit was this teenage Chishi commander before him. Wan Hapeluo had always been proud and arrogant, so he could not endure this sort of humiliation. Wan Hapeluo, calm down and don't be impulsive. Wang Chong is the young marquis of the Tang dynasty, and also Chishi Protector General. He is not someone you can touch as you please. If something really does happen, not even I can protect you. Moreover, Lord Protector General is not an unreasonable person. I believe that he has his reasons for doing this. There is no harm in listening to what Lord Protector General has to say. Gao Xianji sternly said. Wan Hapeluo was powerful and had a vicious appearance. There were few people in the Anshi Protectorate army who could suppress him, and only Gao Xianji was capable of doing so. As for the Karluks in the rear, Wan Hapeluo had run to him 5 or 6 days ago to complain, causing a huge uproar. At the height of the battle, Wan Hapeluo had even led his tribesmen into hiding in Talas, throwing a tantrum and refusing to fight. Because Gao Xianji was at Talas, he had no idea what was going on in the rear, so he had no way of appeasing them. And now that Wang Chong had led more than 100,000 Chishi reinforcements to the battlefield and saved the Anshi Protectorate army, this matter had become even more difficult to deal with. On one side was an ally that he had fought alongside for 10-some years, and on the other side was the Chishi Protector General whom he had owed a debt of gratitude to. Even someone of Gao Xianji's status found it difficult to choose. But no matter what, Gao Xianji was confident that Wang Chong had his reasons. This bastard! What other reason can he have? I won't let him off. Wan Hapeluo's eyes were red as he glared at Wang Chong, his entire body seething with rage. If looks could kill, Wang Chong would have died countless times over. Truly a stubborn nature. With a wave of his hand, Wang Chong began to slowly walk toward Wan Hapeluo. His movements were calm, but there was a hint of majesty about him. As he walked, a powerful pressure erupted from his body like a storm. This pressure forced the surrounding Tang dynasty generals to retreat. The only people around the gates of Talas that could endure this pressure were Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, and Wan Hapeluo. Wang Chong was getting stronger by the day, and though he had only been in the western regions for a short time, he had already slain 2 brigadier generals. Wan Hapeluo was powerful and infamous, but he was not more formidable than Dian Mangpoj or a good Elan. In a one-on-one battle, Wang Chong was 80% confident that he could personally kill him. Wan Hapeluo, you went back on your word and accepted bribes from the Arabs, intending to sell out the 30,000 soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate army. Did you think that I didn't know about all of this? Wang Chong's eyes were chilling as he stopped in front of Wan Hapeluo and harshly rebuked him. Bang! His words were earth-shattering. Everyone was stunned by Wang Chong's words. Wan Hapeluo colluded with the Arabs? How could this be? The Karluks have fought side by side with us for 10-some years, never abandoning us. How could they betray us? Lord Protector General, could there be a mistake? Could there be some sort of misunderstanding? Everyone looked at Wang Chong, finding this matter far too absurd. They simply couldn't believe that the Karluks would collude with the Arabs and betray the Tang dynasty. After so many years of war, the Karluks and the Anshi Protectorate army had become extremely close. From an emotional standpoint, none of the soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate army could accept that the Karluks would betray them. However, No one noticed that Wanhapeluo, who was behind them, suddenly twitched, as if he had been stabbed. "Bastard! Don't slander me. This old man will kill you." Wanhapeluo roared, his eyes red and his entire body seething with killing intent. Whoosh! The black barbaric god axe trembled as it prepared to fly through the air once more. But unlike before, Wanhapeluo seemed to be using 120,000 of his strength this time. "Mengen, pass on my order. If Wanhapeluo dares to make the slightest move, kill the entire Karluk tribe, along with their livestock and horses. Don't leave a single one alive." Wang Chong disdainfully sneered at this sight, his body not even moving. "Yes, my lord." Bang! Like a bolt of lightning, Wanhapeluo found it hard to breathe, his entire body going cold. The axe in his hand trembled, and he found himself unable to swing it again. Even that monstrous murderous aura instantly disappeared like a punctured ball. Wang Chong's simple words had grasped his weak point, completely stifling Wanhapeluo's rage and preventing him from venting it. Chapter 890. In a flash, Wanhapeluo's eyes once more turned incomparably red, almost dripping with blood. As one of the illustrious and ambitious figures of the western regions, Wanhapeluo had always been respected and feared. No one had ever dared to use his tribesmen as a hostage like Wang Chong. To Wanhapeluo, this was the ultimate humiliation. Wang Chong only coldly chuckled, completely disregarding Wanhapeluo. His gaze slowly scanned the crowd, quickly settling on Anshi Vice Protector General Cheng Qianli and Protector General Gao Xianji. Unlike the other Anshi generals, whether it was Cheng Qianli or Protector General Gao Xianji, these two supreme commanders of Anshi were calm, far less agitated than the others. Wang Chong inwardly smiled as if he understood something. "Wanhapeluo, don't act rashly. Don't blame me for not warning you. But the western regions belong to the Tang dynasty. The Karluk tribe only has its current status because the Tang dynasty promoted you. But this does not mean that you can stand on equal footing with us. If you dare to act rashly, you will be offending your superiors. I don't even need a reason to uproot the entire Karluk tribe." Wang Chong looked down at Wanhapeluo. His eyes were cold, as if he could see into the depths of Wanhapeluo's heart. When Wang Chong was recruiting mercenaries in the western regions, he had killed a chicken to warn the monkeys, exterminating a fickle and treacherous Saka, to serve as a warning to all the other tribes. But in Wang Chong's mind, the people he wanted to kill the most were not the Saka, but the Karluk tribe. They were the most fickle tribe in the western regions. The Karluks colluding with Arabia and betraying the Arabs on the battlefield had enormous repercussions, far worse than any ordinary act of treachery. But the Karluks and Wanhapeluo had been recruited by Gao Xianji, so Wang Chong could not casually act against them. "Lord Protector General, could there be a mistake? Could it be another tribe? The Karluks have fought alongside us for so many years, and have always been honest and reliable, never betraying us. How could they possibly collude with the Arabs?" At the gate, a general of the Anshi Protectorate Army couldn't help but step forward. "That's right. Humans are not birds or beasts. How can we be emotionless? We fought side by side for so long, and our bonds are so deep. Anyone can betray us, but the Karluks are the least likely to do so." Another officer of the Anshi Protectorate Army stepped forward and said, "It wasn't that they didn't believe in Wang Chong, but the friendship between Wanhapeluo and the Anshi Protectorate Army had been forged through one bloody battle after another. From an emotional standpoint, they found it very difficult to believe Wang Chong's words." Wang Chong shook his head inwardly when he saw this. Humans and beasts were different, and so were the Han and the Hu. The Anshi Protectorate Army had been completely unprepared for the Karluk tribe's rebellion, and someone had even stepped forward to speak for them. It was no wonder that he had not appeared. The Battle of Talas had ended in such a terrible defeat, with the Karluks switching sides, and the Anshi Protectorate Army having been given a path of retreat. Not even 1,000 soldiers had managed to escape. There's nothing impossible in this world. Don't forget that the Karluks are mercenaries, not the regular army of our great Tang. The reason they're willing to fight alongside us isn't because they have a deep relationship with us, but because the pay we offer is high enough. Wang Chong's eyes slowly scanned the crowd. In a flash, all the Anqi generals fell silent. They naturally understood what Wang Chong was saying, but over time, they had all forgotten that the Karluks were different from them. In truth, they could have betrayed the Tang, but they just didn't want to believe it. As Wang Chong took in the expressions on their faces, he inwardly sighed. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it was impossible to change the impression the Anqi Protectorate army had of the Karluks in a short period of time. But there were some words that Wang Chong had to say to wake up the Anqi Protectorate army. Otherwise, there would be a second and a third Karluk tribe in the future. Mercenaries only fight for the reward. They fight for whoever offers the highest price. In the last 10-some years, the Tang dynasty has always offered the highest price, and the Anqi Protectorate army has always been invincible. The Karluks only need to wave their banners and shout their battle cries as they chase after the enemy. The Karluks would naturally do something with such little risk and high reward. This is the true reason they haven't betrayed us. They haven't betrayed us not because they are loyal and reliable, but because there is no benefit or reason to betray us. In addition, never forget that benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trust are things that only we Han have. The who only care about the weak being prey to the strong, following whoever is stronger. Benevolence and righteousness are of no use to them, Wang Chong declared. These words weren't just directed at Wan Hapeluo and the Karluks. The Tang dynasty's benevolence and righteousness had allowed the common people to live and work in peace, allowing the Central Plains to prosper. But in the eyes of the world, the benevolence and righteousness of the Central Plains and the morals of the Confucian school were of no use. Lions and tigers could roar through the forest and rule over all beasts by relying on their overwhelming strength, not benevolence and righteousness. The cruel forest that was the world was the same. Wan Hapeluo, I'll give you one more chance. In front of everyone, if you come clean, I can still spare your life. Otherwise, all the Karluks will die. Wang Chong stared at Wan Hapeluo, his expression cruel and callous. Wang Chong's callous gaze caused Wan Hapeluo's heart to clench, but he quickly returned to normal. Bastard! I have no idea what you're talking about. Lord Protector General, our Karluks have fought with you for 10-some years. Even if we haven't done much, we've still worked hard. In the end, is this how you treat us? Wan Hapeluo ignored Wang Chong and turned to Gao Xianji, his eyes brimming with rage. This young Tang dynasty protector general had come with a menacing aura and was extremely difficult to deal with. At a time like this, Wan Hapeluo could only place his hopes on Gao Xianji. Wan Hapeluo, calm down. Protector General Wang isn't someone who doesn't understand reason and makes trouble out of nothing. He must have his reasons for doing this, Gao Xianji sternly said. After saying this, he turned to Wang Chong. Protector General Wang, Wan Hapeluo, and the Karluks are friends of our Anqi Protectorate army. We have worked together for many years, and they are worthy of our trust. If Protector General Wang believes that Wan Hapeluo is colluding with the Arabs, I hope that Lord Protector General can produce conclusive evidence, so that the soldiers will be convinced. Wang Chong smiled, keenly sensing a few things from Gao Xianji's final words. Lord Protector General is wise. Wan Hapeluo, death is at hand, but you're still struggling. It seems like you won't give up until you reach the Yellow River. Wang Chong lightly snapped his fingers as he coldly stared at Wan Hapeluo. Wang Chong, you slander us, saying that we're colluding with the Arabs. If you can't produce convincing evidence, I, Wan Hapeluo, swear to the heavens that no matter the price, I will cut you into 1,000 pieces to vent the hatred in my heart. Wan Hapeluo fiercely gripped the barbaric god axe, his expression savage. Although he said this, in reality, the confident and indifferent expression on Wang Chong's face made Wan Hapeluo feel rather uneasy. Wan Hapeluo, since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Wang Chong grinned and waved a hand behind him. Shui Qianjun, bring it up. Wang Chong's words instantly caused the atmosphere to tense. Everyone turned to look, and Wan Hapeluo's heart began to thump as he began to panic. He had been so calm, because he was certain that Wang Chong had no evidence. But if Wang Chong brought out evidence, everything would be completely different. Tap, tap. A few moments later, heavy footsteps came from the rear. As the Anqi generals and spectators watched, Xue Qianjun strode forward, his body ramrod straight and fully armored, accompanied by 4 burly soldiers with bulging temples. These 4 soldiers each took a corner, and they quickly appeared in front of the crowd, each of them carrying a massive and ornate treasure chest made of fine gold. Hong! The 4 of them tossed it with all their might, and the heavy treasure chest immediately landed heavily on the ground with a deafening boom. Amidst the rumbling, everyone could hear a strange sound coming from the treasure chest. It was as if thousands of small things were swaying and colliding inside. Clang! Xue Qianjuan's expression was indifferent. The moment the 4 soldiers put down the chest, he unsheathed his saber, shattering the lock on the chest, and then pushed open the lid. Bang! The sight of the contents of the chest caused an uproar. The chest was densely packed with all kinds of pearls, agates, emeralds, corals, and gems. Its value was immeasurable. When Wan Hapeluo saw this, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His breathing became ragged. Protector General Wang, what is this? Cheng Qianli's eyes widened as he asked. Lord Protector General, General Cheng and soldiers of Anqi, I found this chest of pearls and agates in a secret cave in the Karluk tribe. This many pearls, agates, and emeralds shouldn't have been gifted by Lord Protector General, right? Or did the mercenary Karluks learn to trade and make money? Wang Chong said to the crowd. The crowd buzzed with chatter as the Anqi Protectorate Army soldiers stared at the dazzling array of pearls and gems in the chest, a strange expression on their faces. The Anqi Protectorate Army and the Karluks had a long-term employment relationship, paying them a generous reward every time they completed a mission. But not even the Anqi Protectorate Army could afford to pay the Karluks such an enormous sum. Whether it was pearls, agates, or emeralds, they were all far more valuable than gold of the same size. This chest of pearls, agates, and emeralds was so valuable that even the finance officer of the Anqi Protectorate Army found it difficult to calculate its value. Moreover, Wan Hapeluo and the Karluks had always been extravagant, not thrifty people. Every time they returned from a victory, they would spend as much as they wanted. Not even 10 some years could have accumulated so much wealth. Lord Protector General, is this really all from the Karluks? An officer of the Anqi Protectorate Army asked in a daze, as he stared at the dazzling chest of treasures. Previously, no matter what Wang Chong had said, no one in the Anqi Protectorate Army would believe that the Karluks were colluding with the Arabs. But now that Wang Chong had taken out this chest of treasures, everything had changed. At the very least, the firm conviction in their hearts had begun to waver. Haha! Wang Chong chuckled and shook his head. As everyone watched, he slowly raised a finger. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.